Okay, we'll call this afternoon's work session to order. Welcome to our third budget work session of the FY24 budget cycle. This is Christian Dorsey, Chair of the Board presiding, and joined by members Katie Crystal, Matt DeFerranti, and Takis Karantonis. We expect Vice Chair Garvey shortly. Today we're going to hear presentations from our Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development, as well as our Department of Human Services, and we will spend extensive time covering our housing program, which cross-cuts both departments, and we'll also hear from several representatives from advisory commissions who have workflows that co-align with these departments. As always, there are going to be opportunities for board members to engage in discussion and ask questions, and for those of you who are interested, all of the information about this year's operating budget proposal can be found at the Budget and Finance page at the county's website at arlingtonva.us. With that, kick us off, Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to a person you may recognize from the note I sent to you on Friday afternoon from Manager Notes. A younger version was included in that photo, but here is the current version of Claude Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I am Claude Williamson. I'm the Director of the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development, and I'm here today to present the FY24 budget for CPHD. Just to remind the board, the mission of CPHD is to promote the improvement, conservation, and revitalization of Arlington's physical and social environment. The department's made up of 6 major divisions, including planning, which is overseen by our planning director, Anthony Fusarelli, housing with Ann Venezia as our housing director, the Neighborhood Services Division, led by Chikwe Njoku. Zoning is overseen by our zoning administrator, Arlova Vanam. Inspection Services with Chief Building Official Shari Miri, and Cynthia Hernan, who oversees our Business Operations Division, which includes HR, Budget, and Technology Services. Under the Director's Office, we also have this Research and Strategic Initiatives Group led by Jill Hunger, and our Communications and Engagement Team led by Erica Moore. And I just want to thank them for their hard work this year and their leadership, and I also want to thank everyone in CPHD as well. Before getting into the budget proposal, I'd like to share some of our department's major recent accomplishments since we last met back in March, as well as some key work. I also want to share some key work items that will be coming forward this year. And I also want to recognize all the hard work of all the volunteers of our commissions and those from the larger Arlington community who participated in our processes. These efforts would not have been successful without their involvement. In terms of housing investment, we added 234 new committed affordable units to the rolls and the rehab and affordability extension of more than 450 CAFs. As part of our yearly inspections and with additional money that was given to us in FY23, we're inspecting an additional 2,000 CAF units, which will be completed by this spring. For planning and our growth management efforts, the County Board approved 4 site plans, which generated more than $152 million in community benefits. We expect another $25 million coming forward through 3 additional site plans before the end of the fiscal year. We also completed 3 major long-range planning efforts by adopting the Pentagon City Sector Plan, the Clarendon Sector Plan, and the Courthouse West Special GLUB Study. We have been investing in our neighborhoods as well through the Arlington Neighborhoods Program by completing 4 street and intersection projects totaling over $2.9 million. We also launched the Historic Preservation Fund, which is a pilot grant program soliciting HP projects that range from education and awareness programs to bricks and mortar projects. And for our permitting and inspection efforts, we issued approximately 12,000 permits and completed close to 50,000 inspections, totaling more than 14 million square feet of construction. And finally, we added building and trade permits to our Permit Arlington system last summer and just launched certificate of occupancy permits at the end of February. Although not an exhaustive list, and Anthony's going to provide a little bit more detail on this in his presentation, more specifically to planning division efforts. I just wanted to briefly share some of the key work items that will be coming forward this year and possibly into next from our department. We have currently 13 active site plans in the queue, plus 4 additional conceptual site plans that have been submitted. We're also anticipating several more throughout the coming year. These numbers are way beyond what we typically experience. In addition, there are a number of projects that will be coming forth for County Board consideration in the fall timeframe. such as the Regional Fair Housing Plan, Plan Langston Boulevard, which also includes land use and zoning tools, the Historic Preservation Plan, which hasn't been updated since 2006, and the Home Ownership Study. Staff will continue to make progress and meet milestones related to Crystal Houses, the food study, Barcroft redevelopment and renovations, and the county manager's initiative around market resiliency. Now, in terms of our work related to equity, the department's been very active on many fronts. We've continued to participate in the countywide race and equity training modules. In addition, CPHD's extended management team has received the equity mindset training offered last year. We've also completed work related to the racial history timeline and the creation of demographic dashboards. In the last several months, we've partnered with DPR on the Let's Talk About It series, covering topics such as words matter and cultural appropriation. In terms of organizing, we established a more formal CPHD Racial Equity Committee representing all divisions and groups in the department. One of the first tasks is to start work on a racial equity strategic plan for the department that includes goals, strategies, and projects that advance equity throughout our department. In terms of how we're operationalizing equity objectives, staff is using the race and ethnicity dashboard and the racial equity lens tool in our plans and our reports. We have initiated the broadband study and home ownership study, and will be bringing forward zoning and GLUP proposals related to missing middle at the March County Board meeting. All of these efforts have major implications regarding equity for Arlington. We're also expanding our outreach efforts for civic engagement and getting new and diverse voices in our planning processes. And we also brought back an in-person Permit Arlington Center that can assist in digital permitting services for those who might not be able to have access or capabilities from their own homes. And finally, we'll continue to assess efforts as work continues. This will be an important element to the department's strategic planning efforts moving forward. Now getting into the FY24 budget. This CPHD proposed budget, I believe, is responsive to the needs and priorities of Arlington County. We're proposing strategic reductions in the general fund with the goal of having minor impacts to the work that we do. In addition, with respect to our federal allocations, we anticipate level funding from last year, and due to pressures on the development fund, we're proposing increases to fees that allows us to sustain it into future years. And finally, we continue to apply an equity lens on the reductions and the requests that are recommended in this proposal. The general fund. The general fund supports the planning, housing, and neighborhood services divisions, and a portion of code enforcement and ISD. On this slide, there are two things that I'd like to point out. There's a 54% increase in revenue for FY24, which reflects an increase in anticipated planning applications, and a 5.2% inflationary increase to planning fees associated with the Employee Cost Index, which is also known as the ECI. This ECI has been applied to CPHD fees before, and ensures that the fees keep pace with the annual increases associated with the cost of employees' salaries and benefits. And two, this proposed budget includes the reduction of a management analyst position, an associate planner position, and the transfer of a code enforcement position from the general fund to the development fund, all of which I'll discuss in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. So in developing these reduction proposals, the department took into account impacts to service delivery, opportunities around vacancies, focused on discretionary areas, and looked at organizational efficiencies. In terms of budget reductions, we have 5 proposals that I'd like to share with you today. The first one is the elimination of a vacant management analyst position. This position provides general administrative support to the director's office and the business operations division and the chief race and equity officer in the county manager's office. With this elimination, the responsibilities will need to be moved to another administrative position in the planning division. This further stretches staff capacity to absorb administrative responsibilities for those respective work units. Our next proposal is transferring a code enforcement inspector position from the general fund into the development fund. This position enforces state and local property-related codes. There's no impact to service by this move, and the only change is really the funding source. However, in order to offset the financial impact to the development fund, a current vacant overstrength inspector position will continue to be held vacant, resulting in slightly longer inspection periods. Our next proposal is to eliminate a vacant associate planner position in the comprehensive planning section in the planning division. This reduction will result in reduced capacity to complete work projects in the planning division's annual work plan. In the end, if the county board accepts this reduction, certain projects may need more time to be completed, or the start date may end up being later down the road. Our fourth proposal is to reduce the consultant services budget in historic preservation program. This reduction will require the department to reprioritize various historic preservation initiatives in the department, including the update to the historic resources inventory. The final proposal for the general fund is a reduction in non-personnel items such as computer software licenses, printing, and computer equipment. This reduction will require staff and the community to adapt to less print materials and will need to be more strategic in our use of certain software and technology throughout the department. The Community Development Fund. This fund helps support our community development and affordable housing efforts in the Housing Division. There are federal and state funds which include CDBG, HOME, and CSBG. So there's two things I want to point out as it relates to the 45% change related to expenses and revenues on this slide. The FY23 revised budget reflects our regular allocations, $450,000 in projected program income, and our home ARP funding, which is around $2.5 million. The FY24 proposed removes the one-time home ARP funding and assumes level regular federal funding and projected program income. It's important to note that we have until 2030 to use the home ARP funds. What's not used in 23 will be requested to be rolled over into 24. Currently, CPHD and DHS are working to identify projects for these funds. Also, we're also projecting level funding for 24. But the board needs to know that the future of all federal budgets are unknown, and so our future allocations may be different. And finally, the Development Fund. The Development Fund is made up of development-related fees that support the Zoning and Inspection Services Division. The FY24 Development Fund budget anticipates a 6.1% increase in expenses and a 7.5% increase in revenue. In terms of expenses, we're proposing the transfer of a code enforcement position from the general fund into the Development Fund, and we're also requesting the conversion of 3 unbudgeted temporary positions to go permanent. These temporary positions are currently filled. They include 3 construction plan examiners in ISD and a zoning inspector. ISD and zoning rely on these positions to meet the increasing needs of our customers, and we expect that this need will continue into the future. In terms of revenue, to keep the fund healthy and sustainable, we're proposing the following fee increases. A 5.2% ECI inflationary increase, similar to what's being applied to planning fees, which I mentioned before. And we're also proposing a 6% increase to the indirect cost surcharge to ISD fees. These indirect costs are paid to the general fund every year and reflect the work other departments do to further support the activities of ISD and zoning. We're also proposing the establishment of a 21% indirect cost surcharge for zoning fees. The indirect cost surcharge has never been applied to zoning fees before. These combined proposals would properly cover the increasing costs associated with overhead expenses. In addition, to further our goals for a sustainable development fund, together with DMF and DES, we're studying our development fees to determine whether our current fees are appropriately recovering costs. Recommendations of that study will be coming forward later this year. And finally, before we leave the development fund, I just wanted to give you an update on where we are on Permit Arlington. So to remind the county board, in the past 3 years, we had 3 successful phased launches into Permit Arlington, and we just launched our final public-facing application for certificates of occupancy. However, our most complicated phase, which was back last summer, for building and trade permits did not perform as expected due to the high volume of active records, the complexity of the business process, and some failures in terms of the data conversion process. As a result, this generated a high demand for technical support, and we were unprepared for the volume of requests that occurred. This caused delays in response times, and we regret the impacts that this had on our customers. To address this issue, We shifted senior developers to help support customer needs. We added 4 temporary staff to our help desk, posted user guides and how-to videos to the public website, and we applied the lessons learned to the most recent launch of certificates of occupancy, which has rolled out really smoothly. We've resolved many issues in the past months, and the wait times have reduced, but we're still not back to the target of 1 to 2 day turnaround. The team continues to work on permanent fixes within the database to address issues causing the earlier delays. We anticipate that it will take additional time to resolve these issues and meet targets. The permanent Arlington team is working very hard and is dedicated to this effort. Addressing customer needs is a priority for this program and for this department. And finally, there is one last thing to mention. I just wanted to let people know about the Customer Care Center pilot that was launched last fall up on the 10th floor. Since then, we've been averaging around 46 customers a week with a 5-minute average wait time and 14-minute average service time per customer. We plan to move down to the lobby in late March when construction and other efforts are complete. That concludes the departmental presentation. I'm going to turn this over to Anthony Fusarelli, who's going to provide a brief summary of the preliminary planning division work plan in the event there are specific questions related to that. So, Anthony?
Thank you, Claude. Good afternoon. Anthony Fusarelli, happy to be here today and honored to lead the excellent planning team here for Arlington, Virginia. This afternoon, briefly share a high-level summary of key considerations and priorities for the 2023-2024 Planning Division Preliminary Work Program. This is the first of 3 slides to my presentation this afternoon. However, I will note that there is a more detailed 10-page document depicting the proposed work program, and that is available with the agenda for today's work session. And I believe you all are familiar with that information. In terms of process, the proposed work program was shared with our internal partners for review and feedback. It was also presented at the February 28th meeting of the Long Range Planning Committee of the Planning Commission. And I won't be covering their specific feedback in my prepared remarks, but happy to address any questions that might arise as part of the larger conversation. Before speaking to this year's top priorities, I'd like to review just 6 key considerations that directly shaped and informed the formulation of the preliminary work program. First is the need to timely manage and complete our work on non-discretionary services, especially for site plan and use permit development reviews, in addition to admin changes, other use permit applications, and related matters. Shifting to some of our discretionary work, we're placing a high priority on completing several important long-range planning efforts that are currently in progress. Third, as we complete these long-range planning efforts, and this was a message conveyed last year, we will be shifting greater attention and focus to addressing future zoning studies on a variety of topics in an effort to get our regulations and codes more current and in better alignment with our established visions. And for the next 2 points, these really relate more to how we do our work, both today and moving forward. On racial equity, we are continuing to build our capacity and capabilities in-house in applying a racial equity lens in many aspects of our work, including how we select our work, the scoping of that work, the processes for undertaking that work, and ultimately the outcomes. An important example of this recently or very present includes the racial equity analysis that staff developed for incorporation with our work as part of the Missing Middle Housing Study staff reports. When it comes to broader engagement, it's also important to note our continued adaptation and adjustments to hybrid meeting and public engagements, as is being done elsewhere across the organization. But in the past year, we have worked closely with the Planning Commission leadership on process refinements, especially related to how their subcommittees operate. We believe these have yielded positive outcomes, but it's also important to note that they do require additional administrative time, not just for staff, but also for commissioners as well. And finally, we are very excited about taking on a broader comprehensive plan review effort later this year especially with how that might inform our areas of focus for future work programs. And if we move to the final slide, while the Read Ahead package online presents much more detail and complete information, I do want to showcase here a number of our top priorities as currently proposed. Again, on the non-discretionary side, we will be focusing on the timely management and review of over a dozen active special exception site plan and use permit development applications, along with just as many, if not more, applications that we currently anticipate and may be additionally filed later this year or in 2024. This work really comprises a significant component of our non-discretionary work portfolio that we must complete in a timely fashion. Next up, this month, our team is excited to present general land use plan and zoning ordinance amendments resulting from the missing middle housing study for the board's consideration, which just last night received a recommendation from the Planning Commission in this room. If these amendments are approved in the spring, our team will be preparing informational documents and establishing the permitting and monitoring framework necessary to be ready by the effective date, as well as addressing other items. Another important long-range planning effort, our work on Plan Langston Boulevard, is on track for us to bring forward a final plan and supporting implementation strategies to the Commission and the Board for consideration in action later this year. Work on the future of outdoor dining study is also progressing. Current efforts largely focused on developing updated guidelines and considering what potential regulatory amendments we want to bring forward to ultimately incorporate more flexibility for broader outdoor dining environments where supported by appropriate environmental conditions. With respect to Barcroft, our planning team looks forward to continuing to work with our internal partners and the Jair Lynch team to review their master financing and development plan, and we anticipate a more detailed update to stakeholders next month. Turning to special GLUP studies, our general land use plan studies, our team is targeting commission and board review of the 2000 North Glebe Road study in May, and if completed at that time, this should release capacity needed to move on to the next Tier 2 special GLUP study currently in the queue. Progress continues on another key aspect noted in last year's work program, which involves a phased approach to several zoning studies, really in partnership with staff in environmental services and parks and recreation, that really address important aspects of our public lands, whether it is the public spaces master plan implementation, whether it is better facilitating and accommodating stormwater management objectives and solutions, as well as looking ahead to better managing county use of lands for essential services and operations. So we have been phasing our work over time and continuing to make progress in that arena. Finally, moving down the list, we have initiated discussions and thinking within CPHD and with our partners internally on looking at the next phase of the child care initiative, really thinking through how to make the best use of some resources we have included with this year's fiscal 23 adopted budget to address the important needs of that work. And then finally, noted as a key consideration earlier, we're very excited about the work we'll undertake on the comprehensive plan review, really to identify areas where future updates would be helpful, we believe, to the comprehensive plan that would help inform future work programs, and really focusing on how best to incorporate maybe some elements that perhaps aren't as present in the comprehensive plan as perhaps they should be. So with that concludes my brief summary for this afternoon. Be happy to address any questions within the context of a broader discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fusarelli, and we'll get to that in a moment. Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We're now going to take a little bit of a break to hear from our commissions who are associated with the work that's been presented thus far. I'd like to invite Devanshi Patel, Chair of our Planning Commission, and Omari Davis, who I also saw back there, Chair of our Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board, to come on up to the table. And I think we're joined, Ms. Jacobs, by Laura Malikoff, the Chair of SIDSAC. virtually. And I think, why don't we start with Ms. Malakoff, move on to Mr. Davis, and then have you back clean up, Ms. Patel. That work? Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Again, this is Laura Malakoff, Chair of the Community Development Citizens Advisory Committee. I want to first thank the County Board for its support of the many organizations that meet the housing and community development needs of Arlington's low and moderate income residents through the Community Development Fund. It might not be the most highly visible funding source, but many of the programs that support the county's underserved residents receive funding through this program. So along with county staff, the Community Development Citizens Advisory Committee works hard to ensure that families have access to the programs that help them to secure and maintain housing, avoid homelessness, achieve economic mobility, and foster neighborhood sustainability. So this past year, the committee reviewed, scored, and ranked over 40 applications, and we worked with staff to formulate the Community Development Fund budget recommendation being discussed today. We will be reviewing the budget proposal along with the FY24 action plan at our upcoming April meeting, and we intend to write a letter recommending approval. In our review of the applications for funding, each of the committee members really brought their experience as county residents and representatives for the low and moderate income residents of their communities. And we really placed a focus on reviewing applications with an eye toward diversity and equity. And our goal is to recommend projects for funding that best meet the needs of the community and recommend organizations that have the capacity to really be good stewards of the funding. So I just want to extend my thanks for supporting this work. And I wanted to finally note that every year, CIDSAC hosts a community development bus tour where we visit and highlight programs funded through the Community Development Fund. So I'd like to personally invite county leadership to participate in this year's event, which will be on May 3rd. And thank you very much for your support and for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malakoff. I hope you can stay on if there are any questions or conversations that you'd like to opine on. But next, Mr. Davis, please.
Thanks, Ted. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Omari Davis. I'm the chair of the Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board. I just want to thank County Manager Schwartz and the board members today for time to speak. And I just wanted to sort of jump right in. I want to thank you all again for the opportunity actually to share and discuss different things at today's budget work session. So in review of the FY24 budget, on behalf of the HLRB, we were unfortunately dismayed to see proposed cuts to our consultant services. While the amount of the cuts is minimal relative to the overall budget, these cuts will have an outsized impact on the effectiveness of the historical preservation program. First and foremost, these cuts will delay implementation of the forthcoming preservation master plan, along with elements such as conducting new studies and updating the historical resources inventory. I think we would all agree that the HRA definitely could stand to be updated. I think that the biggest issue with our cuts and master plan at this point is that the master plan is set to be adopted in the fall, and this will culminate in 4 years of our work and our countless hours of our public input in the making, and to have the funding cut at this point. Have the funding cut at this point in the process is almost like having the rug pulled out from under the plan. And unfortunately, this would be extremely unfortunate, ill-timed, and self-defeating, I believe. And so, let's see. And I guess in addition to this, cuts will also hamper and reduce historical preservation staff's capacity to conduct archaeological monitoring, as well as the development of historical markers, the latter of which is the most visible means by which the public engages with the HP program. Limiting this outreach and limiting the profile of historic preservation will affect the way that it's seen in our community. And finally, I wanted to end on a high point. I want to thank County Manager Schwartz and also the board for the funding for their historic preservation fund. This fund presents Arlington with a unique and innovative opportunity to approach preservation from the grassroots up. And the fund also allows our communities, the fund also empowers communities to set priorities and guide what preservation looks like for them. The fund has an added benefit of extending the expertise of historic preservation staff throughout the community during time of intense growth and development in the county. So I want to thank you again for your time to speak about the FY24 budget, and please do consider the outsized impacts that this relatively minor cut will have the historic preservation program. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And if you'll stay tuned, I know that will be the subject of at least one question during our conversation, so don't go too far. And Ms. Patel.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Dorsey, colleagues, members of the County Board, County Manager. On behalf of the Planning Commission, we appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about the County Manager's proposed FY 2024 operating budget. Of particular concern for the Commission is the elimination of the vacant Associate Planner position with CPHD. We agree with staff's analysis that the impact will be a reduction in the overall capacity and resources of the Comprehensive Planning Division, and to support projects identified in the division's annual work program, thereby resulting in delays in completing project work. Staff is busy. That's probably an understatement. Staff is busy. In fact, the most recent forecasting document for 2023 shows approximately 34 projects, many of which will go into 2024. There are no signs of projects slowing down, and in fact, it's to the contrary. There are a number of current planning processes that, once approved, are certain to open pathways to additional development applications. So eliminating an associate planner position will have downstream implications. For example, Plan Langston Boulevard is strongly encouraged to come before the Planning Commission for approval and implementation in the third quarter. We know, however, that PLB is a discretionary project. A non-discretionary project that many in the community, including myself, that are hoping to see is the VHC project, and that will be on Carlin Springs Road. Both PLB and VHC are important in their own right and should be prioritized. One has the possibility of meeting the county's affordable housing needs along the corridor, and the other is able to meet a critical public health need. Without enough staff, resources are strained and parallel priorities are unnecessarily become competing priorities. We strongly recommend that that not happen and that the associate planner position be retained. Additionally, throughout the pandemic, we've seen that staff's implementation of expanded community engagement initiatives, and with the Missing Middle Housing Study, the implementation of a racial equity analysis framework, those we've seen come through, and we are hoping to have them expanded. We're blessed to have an engaged community. However, all of us know that not every Arlingtonian is at the table. And in order to thoughtfully design processes and rosters to ensure all voices are heard, and to develop additional skills to intentionally solicit opinions from those most impacted from our planning processes, we must ensure that staff has the capacity for this additional outreach, engagement, and study. The Planning Commission adopted its equity statement in 2020, and this past week we heard from so many from our community on how we can honor and operationalize our commitment to equity. This Planning Commission centers equity in all aspects of its work, and it recognizes that planning staff is an essential partner in providing the resources necessary to ensure expanded opportunities are available to invite everyone to the table, and elimination of that associate planner position threatens to compromise our ability to not only reimagine inclusive processes, but also to implement them. So I thank you for your time and attention, and I am available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. And colleagues, why don't we have some questions on what has been presented thus far. I'll start us off. So as it relates to the Community Development Fund, can you give us a sense, Mr. Williamson, of how much money is left unspent from the home ARP funds?
It's my understanding that those funds have not been spent yet.
At all?
At
Okay.
all.
So the entire balance is available. And Ms. Malakoff, I think you said it's April that we're getting those recommendations about?
That's correct. Our meeting will be the first Wednesday of April.
Great.
And we will provide those immediately after that.
Well, we look forward to that. And a question just for you, while we have you, as you've sort of looked at the expressions of community need, are you seeing any emerging trends over the last year that we should be thinking about in advance of preparing for your recommendations?
I think the primary trend that we are seeing is a increased request for funding and the subsequent conversations among the committee about how we formulate our recommendations to do our best to accommodate the increased amount of funding and evaluate programs accordingly, and continue to debate amongst ourselves the merits of funding, recommending funding to be met in the entirety of the request versus kind of spreading funding more widely with the intention of reaching more beneficiaries. And so, in short, we have been observing a trend in an increased request for funding across the board.
So not necessarily new needs, but need for funding of existing needs more deeply than before.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll spread it around. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the comprehensive report here. I know that these are many, many things. And I have to say, I felt a little bit better last year when we had the planning, session separate from this session. I think it's a lot in one bucket. I think we should be returning to this format. But just to pick up where Ms. Patel left it, so can we explain a little bit better why and how are we going to digest the reduction in one associate planner, given the work that is in front of us? And I'm not only referring to Langston Boulevard and the implementation pressure on that, and Missing Middle housing study will be coming to this. We have also the Barcroft process, which affects thousands of households as well. So can you elaborate a little bit on?
Yeah, and then I might turn it over to Anthony to assist. But in terms of identifying that position, if you recall in my presentation, there are lots of considerations that we have to take into account in terms of when we're in reduction mode. And some of those considerations were really about focusing on discretionary areas versus non-discretionary areas and vacancies. And there was an opportunity, if you want to look at it as an opportunity, but there was a vacancy in the comprehensive planning section. And recognizing it's also a discretionary area. These, I would say on the current planning side is the non-discretionary areas where legally we're required to respond to development applications. The long-range planning side of things is a little bit more discretionary. I was willing as director looking to decide that cut would probably be impactful, but probably a little bit easier because if there is a vacancy, we wouldn't have to necessarily identify a position that's already filled. So there were different variables that we took into account as we looked at that.
Thank you. I don't envy you. I understand that,
very challenging.
That you are operating in a
Yes.
restricted environment. I was trying, and I know that it's a vacant position today. We haven't been.
It is vacant.
What I didn't remember is what did we expect from this position? Why did we have this position in the first place? So I was trying to see when this position was approved and put into our steady stream of finance, the tax-supported stream of financing. So we had something in mind. And this hasn't changed so much. If anything, I understand that it's to a certain degree discretionary, but I just see that the pressure is high.
There is high pressure, yes.
And I have I have the highest respect for the effort that staff has been, the work that you have been doing, the entire department has been working very, very hard. And the community is expecting even a lot more. So this is why I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is a useful conversation to do what is our periodic PSA to the broader community about when we talk discretionary, non-discretionary. It's not an expression of importance. It's an expression of what we are required by law to consider and that we cannot put off versus what we choose to do for our community. At least in terms of that matrix, the interests of our community in pursuing bodies of work that are affirmed through this board are of preeminent importance, but they cannot supersede what is required to be addressed through, through our planning division, through our CPHD division. And this conversation about capacity, making sure it's right-sized to deal with both what we are required and state mandated to do versus what it is we want to do is a key part of this conversation. Ms. Crystal.
Well put. And speaking of discretionary items that have garnered our attention, thank you so much, first of all, to staff for the presentation. It is really a reminder of how large a body of work this, relatively speaking, smaller department actually manages. And thank you to our commission chairs who are with us today. I did want to pick up on the comments Chairman Davis made about the HLRB's concerns on the consultant services. What I'm trying to understand is the sort of what is the baseline when we are not, for consulting services, when we are not in the middle of a comprehensive plan element update. So I think we've seen, for example, that we often bring in consulting services at the start of a major master planning exercise, or like Sun Boulevard comes to mind, right? Another sort of comp plan element, and then that kind of naturally tapers down, right? And so if we are driving towards a conclusion of the historic preservation master plan, is this sort of a return to baseline, or does it represent sort of the loss of what has been ongoing for many years and is kind of critical to do the day in and day out work of the historic preservation program?
Yeah, I might turn this over to Chikwe, but just if I want to add this comment, the consulting funds are ongoing, and this would be a removal of those. We typically don't use these types of consulting funds on something like the Historic Preservation Master Plan update. Those are used in other fashions. These funds also assist staff in doing additional, in the development of markers and any archaeological studies that we might need to do along the way. There's some years that we do archaeological studies, other years that we don't. But these are what these funds are typically used for.
Thank you.
Chikwe, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
He's right here.
So
Wherever you are.
right, wherever. So yes, you basically hit the nail on the head. And for archaeology purposes, for marker purposes, any types of studies that come up throughout the year, that was mentioned, the HRI. I mean, that's one of the major implementation items from the Historic Preservation Master Plan. So that would be funded through that as well. And that's probably going to be a multi-phase project. So.
Got it. So that, am I right then to assume that the consulting monies are really for sort of a specialized set of knowledge that we don't retain on staff?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll just note that on the associate planner, I think that there are a couple of vacancies that you're still filling. And so with this position, I guess I'm interested over the coming months of exploring whether there's I know it would be ongoing funding, but whether there's a way that we can make it a half year and then ongoing. I know that's not a fiscal savings that the manager, that we most love, because it would still be an ongoing cost. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on the timing because it takes time to find that right fit for the other two positions that I believe are still being filled or may have been filled. Do you have any thoughts on the timing for how long it might take to fill vacancy type positions like that. And I don't, you don't have to speculate, but how close are we? If it's going to be January 1st before we could fill this position anyway, I might be interested in a half-time position. Ed.
So I'll do my best to address the question, and if not, we can try again. But just actually appreciate the question, because something I didn't note in my remarks was that currently, I think in total we have 30 FTEs, if my numbers are right, within the planning division. Right now, we have 4 vacancies. Now, that's just, there's natural ebb and flow. And so we are actively, 3 of those vacancies, we are actively moving forward with filling them as quickly as we can. That 4th vacancy that we are not working to fill is the associate planner position that is a proposed cut. In terms of the timeline for how long it takes to fill those vacancies, I think we've done well to timely fill 1 or 2 other recent vacancies over the past few years. I don't have an exact number or timeline in front of me, but once we know that vacancy is going to happen or has happened, we move immediately towards filling it.
Sure, that's great. That's really helpful. I'm mindful that to find these positions, it can take different times, and so that's just signaling a level of interest. I'll yield to have additional questions on the road.
Sure, yeah, we'll give everyone opportunities for multiple rounds. Vice Chair Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for being late. I don't know if you talked about neighborhood college, but I was delighted to see that we're going to sessions and it's going way up. It's just a great, I could talk about how good I think that is for our community, but thank you very much. A couple of questions on hoarding. Is the hoarding? Yeah, I saw the reports on hoarding. Is that a function of aging? So the more older people you have, the more hoarding you have? I don't know. And then I noticed that there was clearing. That was one thing. And then there was like more hoarding, but less clearing. So what's happening? I'm sure there's something, but it's just not here. Thank you. Mr. Amir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, we are still doing hoarding. I'm not a psychologist, so it's not a function of age.
Okay.
It's a function of that psychological disorder that causes it. In terms of the lean and clean, is that the next question that you
yes.
said? We really lost our contractor during COVID period, so we didn't have a contractor, but we have resumed that this. At least this new fiscal year we are in currently, and we have done several of them, 3 of them, lean and clean. And we are in the process of getting our RFPs out to get a contractor that we can move forward with.
And I assume you work in conjunction with DHS.
Yes, we actually have a team from DHS Mental Health, DHS for Housing, Fire Department is involved, sometimes Child Protective Services. So it's a combination, and Fire Marshal, if I mention, it's a combination, it's combined effort, and we have a ongoing hoarding task force that meets regularly.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just wanted a little more information. Thank you.
Thank you. To begin round 2, moving back to the historic preservation program. So, Mr. Manager, we're not continuing the one-time historic preservation funds allocation of 150 in any amount. We're zeroing that out for this year, or is there something in it for FY24?
Just to give the board a little bit of history, there were a couple actions that were done, I believe, in FY23 that generated the seed money for the Historic Preservation Fund, which I think we now have around $300,000 to do. We are not requesting an additional $150 for FY24. We're in the middle of the pilot project. More than likely, we will probably be dispersing those FY23 funds probably toward the end of this fiscal year, or so before June. And so we will be administering and assessing the pilot program through FY24. So for that reason, we didn't request additional funds, but I can imagine, I think we will be requesting funds for FY25.
Got it. So just in terms of that calendar tick-tock, we would need to wait until roughly this year, next time, to ascertain, to give you all the comfort to actually extend advertising the program for future fiscal year.
That is correct. And we
Right.
want the benefit of assessing the program in the
Okay.
pilot and see what kind of impacts it might have
Okay.
or changes. And so that's why we thought it was a little too early to request additional funds for FY24.
Thank you, thank you. All right, remembering my order, I think it's Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. On the planning side, and Mr. Fossarelli, I guess you expect that question from me. So there is significant constituent input, and last year we had this conversation as well on lot coverage and a study associated with that. Now I understand that we have, you have a full plate, no question about this. So do you see a place where we reasonably we could align and assure that we can see such a study beginning?
Thank you for that question. You are correct, right? We have one of the priorities in the work program as a consideration was completing some of the major long-range planning efforts. Beyond a few that were noted, we still have multifamily reinvestment study and others that are ahead of us that we'd like to conclude soon. So in terms of prospective timing on, thinking about lot coverage and whether it's the scoping of that study or the undertaking of that study, on the scoping side, I think some preliminary thought on that would suggest, if it would be optimal if we can get through, those long-range planning efforts ahead of us this year and next. Plan Langston Boulevard, some of the special GLUP studies we still have ahead of us, but then also multifamily and reinvestment and the future of outdoor dining. If we can sort of clear those projects, those major projects off our plate by the end of this year into early next, perhaps then carving out some time to scope what a lot coverage study would be. And I think also in relation to lot coverage, you'll be seeing that part of last night's Planning Commission recommendation was also thinking about like a floor area ratio approach to low residential neighborhoods as opposed to units per acre or lot size. So there may be opportunities to link those two. So prospectively, scoping sometime in 2024. Another angle or I think important consideration is, do we want to have the benefit of some data, some development, if EHOs are approved and can be permitted later this year, do we want to have some on-the-ground data in terms of what that's yielding to be able to incorporate into a lot coverage study? That is also, and the study itself is also a recommendation of the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan. So those things coming together, prospectively scoping, no earlier than 24, and then maybe coming back for a conversation about when an actual study, would be most sensible given the timing of EHO.
Could I follow up?
Thank you. I have no doubt that this won't be a short study, and I understand that there is a sequence that you would like to have some data from here. We want to see how the Natural Resources Plan plays out, how what other kind of requirements we'll be amassing. And the FAR approach is also a very interesting, planning approach in general. I would like, though, to encourage to actually be intentional in getting that, in putting some priority behind that, greater than it's visible today. I know that you have it in mind, though. Thank you.
So why don't we go ahead and see if there are any perspectives on this particular
That's
issue
what I want to
before we move
follow
on?
up on
Okay,
this.
but we got an order.
Oh,
so
okay.
Hold tight.
Please, let me
All right, go ahead, Vice Chair Carney.
I missed all that time with you all, here I am. Just following up, is scoping something we could do a consultant? We could hire a consultant to do? And so that while we kind of figure out the parameters of what we want to do, and then when the data's in, we're ready to kind of move forward? You must have anticipated that question.
Well, one very current thought, right? And I made mention, I think earlier, to another of our priorities for this year, which is really advancing the Child Care Initiative Phase 2, which the board incorporated into this year's fiscal budget, $75,000 in consultant funds. Right? We are here in March, right? 9 months into the fiscal. Just now really having the capacity to begin the staff conversations that require for scoping, which go well beyond CPHD, human services, economic development, parks and recreation. So I guess briefly put, even getting to the point of having consultants be able to come on board and help scope that, I'm not quite sure that's all that helpful, especially given the amount of Arlington specific and Arlington distinct intelligence that they would need to know and understand. It may, at the end of the day, be more efficient for staff to actually do the scoping than if we decide if there's a decision to seek consultant support to undertake that which it is that we have scoped. That might be an approach I think we'd want to pursue.
Okay. I associate myself with Mr. Karantonis' thoughts that, we're just hearing a lot about this, so we'd love to figure out a way to move it forward a little bit faster. Thank you.
Ms. Crystal.
I think that was really well put, and it resonates with me, the idea that there are many things we can look to consultants to do, but I think the biggest challenge vis-a-vis lot coverage is in setting the scope, which is to say, collectively defining as a community what problem we want to solve by changing lot coverage. And I think, not to get too deep in the weeds of something that we will have plenty of time to talk about, when I think about, we started out with the missing middle, there was a pre-scoping community engagement phase, and it was so important to just hear what our priorities were to get the scope right. And I think about how adrift we would be had we not even done that work to set the scope and say the things the community cares most about is preservation of neighborhood look and feel and affordability. And those have been the two things that drove the staff recommendations that we've all, as the board and community, sought to evaluate any proposal against. I think starting, lot coverage without saying, what do we want to change lot coverage to do, is probably a recipe for maybe something even more contentious than how we've spent, the last year or so. So I am very eager to take up this conversation. I think there are a lot of really interesting ideas, some coming out of the Planning Commission, for example, about how to think differently about density and form throughout our less intensively developed neighborhoods to serve community goals. But I think it's just so important that we figure out what those community goals are first. And so, if we can't carve out that time and that space for that conversation, then I think kind of barreling forward anyway, not that either of you recommending that, would ultimately lead to some real challenges. All of that said, I think there is one issue where actually we have defined the problem through a comprehensive community analysis, which is one forthcoming with the Natural Resources Management Plan. And that is the idea of, are there ways to adjust lot coverage, relatively modestly and preserve more trees during redevelopment of those properties. I know the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan has really grappled with this and some of the tensions and trade-offs. I anticipate that one of the recommendations forthcoming from them is likely to be some simple changes, nothing's ever simple when it comes to lot coverage, but some relatively minimal changes around, for example, shifting closer to the setbacks, smaller in the front yards than they are in the rear yard to protect more tree growth in the rear yards. I would love to make sure that we have the capacity within planning to just take a look at what comes out of forestry and natural resources, see if there's some, relatively speaking, quick strike things we can do short of that full scoping and comprehensive community conversation to see if we can't, change our rules to some degree to really serve this strongly held desire, I think, across all sectors of the community, which is to protect trees during redevelopment of low density properties. So that's sort of my take overall, and I hope we can find a little capacity to pursue that goal if possible.
Mr. DeFerranti, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the point on consultant services and the scoping, and I agree with the point on the Natural Resources Management Plan. But for me, I think there are a host of legal issues involved. My understanding of the last time we analyzed lot coverages, it took years more than we thought. But for me, a priority, I'm sort of a third voice that feels like we need to get to this within the next 6 to 12 months for me, in deeper discussion. And I don't think it has to be, we've had mention of FAR, we've got setbacks. I think the lack of clarity from the board has led to no 2x2s that have defined the problem. And with the board, and that doesn't mean the community shouldn't have full voice, but I think I think the timeframe for me is shorter, and there's a desire, at least, there's a clear signal, I think, from three of us that within the next 6 to 18 months want to dig into part of this. I would say that the task of going to a FAR system is a big source of discussion. That does not feel within our grasp to me in the next 6 to 18 months, but I'm mindful that that may be inextricably linked with the setbacks piece. But I want to at least signal that I'm a third voice that feels that we need to put this within our reach in a shorter time frame than we have. And I know we'll talk about this more, but thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues.
Thank you. Well, I don't think we need to talk about it much more today, and I'll just add my voice to this going, this is extremely difficult, complicated, or nuanced, layered, and everything else. And I really think Mr. Fusarelli's point that we can't just simply think that some other expert is going to be able to do something that reflects what needs to be considered in Arlington, and therefore it's going to require staff resources that are already overspent on other areas, and there's a proposal to reduce them further. Just want to be very clear about where we are. So as much as we may believe that this is important or a priority, the task that we have is to provide the resources to make it happen, not simply ask that it be prioritized. So over the course of the budget season, if this emerges as something that the board has greater specificity about what it would like to do, we have a responsibility to make sure it's reflected in the capacity in the budget. I'll leave it at that. Ms. Crystal?
Different topic.
Okay. Different topic? All right, we're on to the next round. All right, I think I start off. We'll continue that. All of my questions have been asked. So, Mr. Karantonis?
Yeah, just briefly in the third round. The department, the urban design group, that is always very dear to me. It's also to a certain degree discretionary, but I think that its output is critical for the success in many non-discretionary areas. So I'm struggling to figure out whether we resource it properly, whether we can do more, or whether we implement the emphasis in this department in an efficient way to inform everything we can. I kind of theoretically believe that a great urban design department is a very helpful tool to get everybody, everybody else who's working on these difficult topics, or complex topics, I should say, to be more efficient in delivery. And I want to make sure that we leverage the most out of this department.
Does that conclude your questions on this part?
Yes, I want to know what. It is a question. It is a question. It is a question. I try to see urban design being more present in the considerations that we make, besides other policy considerations. And for me, this is extremely important because it conditions a lot how how scoping functions, how the community receives things, how equity works. So this is, for me, really important.
Well, urban design. So urban design has come a long way in terms within the planning division. I don't know if people recall that former board member Jay Fazette initiated an urban design initiative, and which really promoted the importance of good urban design in the work that we do. From then, we have made changes. We have an urban design awards, which reflect great quality projects that we have out there in Arlington County. But we also reorganized. We never had an urban design section within the planning division. We do now. We have 3 people who support that section. Overall, I think looking at the planning division, I think it's very, very efficient division. And I think we have leaders and great managers in that division that really recognize the talent, not only in the urban design team, but also on the current planning side and comprehensive planning side, where we can shift and move certain staff resources and expertise. Do I think it's understaffed in terms of urban design? Absolutely. I would love to have additional staff resources in that area. Urban design is very important to me. I know it's very important to this planning director. And so I hope that answers your question.
That answers it to a certain degree. Do you believe that we should consider improving at least the Design Arlington program, adding some sort of, we are giving awards. We're trying to incentivize practitioners here in Arlington to produce better buildings, right? Buildings that look better, work better, are friendlier to our goals as a community. So do you think that we have to improve this program to maybe add a monetary reward or some sort of material
The
reward
award to the Urban Design Awards process? Yeah, I'll actually turn to
I'm happy to
Mr.
take it up
Fusarelli.
I think actually, and I may have.
Anthony was actually one of the first people to work this program through.
Right. I think the lead of our historic preservation program, Cynthia Lachez Torres, and I helped sort of revive the Design Awards program that was once nested within HLRB, and then it became a broader opportunity. So over the number of years that, 2009, 2007, when that was revived, I'm actually still amazed that we get the level of interest each, I think every other year that we run the program in the applications we get, knowing there is not a monetary award, and there still seems to be an appetite and desire to, put forth one's great work, seek recognition for it, and have it celebrated. So I'm not sure that it's, that it's absolutely necessary that it would lead to more applications. I think it's hard to say. Obviously, it would depend on the size of the monetary award.
Thank you. I was more thinking of incentivizing people to actually have competitive processes for design solutions to their buildings. We had some criticisms. For example, Columbia Pike, the form-based code is interpreted in a very standard way, let's say, and you get a lot of repetition in design choices because the designers have chosen to optimize their time and produce the same design once, to copy and paste. So maybe I will take it up with you to see whether we can incentivize a more diversified approach to this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Crystal next.
Thank you. And I just wanted to note, Mr. Chair, I really appreciated your comments that if we are interested in more things, it is now our opportunity as well as responsibility to find the resources for them. And I also wanted to note, thinking that it was under my auspices that we gave budget direction last year. I think in case anyone needs reminding, the reason these cuts are on the table is because this board asked the manager to bring us a budget with a flat tax rate. And so I just wanted to say, I know I see Mr. Williamson, we'll see all of our departmental directors. I know there is no departmental director that wants to be before us with cuts. So I just think it's important they're following through on our direction when we ask these questions. That's an important thing to bear in mind. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the shift to Permit Arlington online since we've got you here. Obviously, this has been something on the mind of our community recently. I appreciated the details that you shared about some of the challenges of introducing those last phases of permits online back in September. One thing that I'm not sure I heard that seems to be the biggest pain point, at least that I hear from constituents or that has come up in the community, is the handshake between divisions or departments being a particular challenge. So, it's not just what is the customer care I get from the customer care center. It is when my permit needs to go from ISD to DES. Or from somewhere within CPHD to somewhere else within CPHD. That's where things seem to, at least anecdotally we hear, things are getting dropped, delayed, or other issues kind of beset the process. Can you or the appropriate team members share a little more about how you work with within the kind of multiple entities within CPHD and the divisions there, or with other divisions and areas maybe you see room for improvement? Would you challenge that perspective that there's problems at the point of handshake or handoff? What else should we know? I know. I saw I felt like I was very powerful at that moment.
Well, your question sort of reflects the amount of interdivisional and interdepartmental efforts that occur in order to issue permits.
Exactly.
And so we do have Shahriar Amiri here with ISD and Arlova Vonum with the zoning division. And we also have our Permit Arlington program manager, Debbie Albert. But it is complex, and we've heard some of that feedback as well in terms of, the interactions and the relationships between the different divisions and the departments, and maybe one department or division is holding something up and they're waiting for that next approval to be moved forward. It is always a challenge. The Permit Arlington system was designed to help facilitate permits going through the process. I believe it has. But I will turn it over to Mr. Amiri, who would like to provide a little bit more comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Ms. Crystal, as a practitioner of 37 years and counting, so some of the comments you hear is I'm not surprised by it. Every time you have this mass migration from a Y2K technology to a new technology, it's a lesson learned for everybody. Our staff has to learn different tools, different manners to do, and our customers the same. I always recall when I was in Montgomery County, I made the news in a matter of a week. They said how great you're doing, and the first day we went up, the system shut down for 3 weeks, and we didn't know how. So I've seen that happen. I think it's part of the process. If you ask, I suspect that if you ask our customers 6 months down the line, that you're not going to see the same type of complaints. One of the things I think I have always been proud of is creation, the concept of Permit Arlington. You don't see that often when 3 functional areas come together with different priorities and collaborate and work as a team. I welcome you to come to the 10th floor when we are open. I mean, we have the same mission. We established the same timeline for review. We were all over the map. ISD was 3 weeks, somebody else was 4 months, or vice versa. We have agreed upon time frame. I think some of the delays and frustration is just learning the new system. And I think right now that we have launched the CO, the last piece of this process, I think the next effort is to, modifying the pain point, paying more attention to how we can, maneuver the system to, to serve our customers. But I don't believe there is anything broken in the process. I think we have made a great deal of improvement in the process, the handoff from department to department. I can tell you the staff on all fronts, they are very keen about the handoff needs to be smooth. So I think this is a combination, of learning new system, and we need to be a little bit patient for it, until we manage going to the next mode of streamlining the process. I would hope that 6 months down the road, when we do a survey, the results would be definitely different. I don't know whether I answered your question or not.
It did. I mean, I think that my question was, are there areas to improve that handshake? And I think what I'm hearing from you is that to the extent customers have had experiences below what we would expect or want for them, it's really been of the new system.
Partly the new system. I'm not saying that our processes are great. We have a very complex process that everybody needs to touch everything. The building permit that goes out of here has my signature on it. But before I can put my signature on it, another half a dozen departments needs to sign off on it. So it's a complexity of the process also that feeds that one. And when you're going to a brand new system that everybody has to learn from beginning, it sometimes exasperates the experience.
Thank you.
Mr. DeFranti.
Thank you. I'll have a separate question. I mean, I'd be interested, and I'll want to follow up on as you move to the first floor, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and also just a little bit better understanding of that hope that we reduce those times over the next 6 months. That'll be really of interest. So I don't know that'll be in this month, but I will be asking for a meeting down the road in this. My question, I'm sort of, I have two areas of questions, and I want to be efficient. I'm not sure, the work plan, we're covering that right now. Is that correct? We're not going, you're not going to cover that? Okay. So the question is, Ms. Patel, you really aligned with my thinking on Langston and the VHC, and I am very eager to move forward on both. And I wanted to see, I think this is for Mr. Fusarelli, it's, I know that there's both the plan and then the implementation on Langston, and my sense is the estimate is third quarter of this calendar year, and there's a little bit of work left to do to see if both plan and implementation can come to us at the same time. I just want to express how eager I am for that to move forward and to understand that question. A little bit of, do we need some more work before we know whether it's plan and implementation at the same time, or we already set that both the plan and the implementation framework would come forward together?
No, thank you for clarifying that question. And I think the last time we spoke indicated some of the project team meetings were upcoming to really dive deeper into that. One of them just occurred last week. I have greater confidence or increased confidence that we'll be able to bring forward the implementation and the plan.
Great.
And as noted in the documentation, our current target would be third quarter.
Great. Well, thank you. I feel like in the movie where they say, I strenuously hope that we can get there soon, and I know that's been so that's it. I will have one more question, and I can yield now or do it at your pleasure, Mr. Chair.
Wrap it up.
I wanted, thank you, sir. Melwood, I wanted to inquire about the Melwood project, and that is an opportunity for additional affordable housing. I know that a site plan has been submitted. I wondered if you could provide an update. That is also a priority.
Thank you for that question as well. The Melwood site, as well as another site on the 2300 block of South East Street, those currently comprise the two Tier 2 special GLUP studies that are in the queue. I believe just from a chronological perspective, if memory serves, the East Street application, I think, was submitted the cycle before the Melwood. And as I noted earlier, we're looking to bring forward to the Commission and Board in May the closeout for the North Glebe, the 2000 North Glebe special GLUP study. So I would anticipate that shortly thereafter, we would be beginning the next Tier 2. And we will have more detailed information in terms of which that is probably a few months from now.
Great, thank you. I'm mindful of the chair's comment that both with respect to financial resources, but also work, we would have to pull something out in order to want something sooner. So I'll follow up on that one. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. DeFranti. Vice Chair Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. I was told that when you did your presentation, you did not go over the child care initiative. If that's true, could you just give a few sentences on, this is a priority coming up, Child Care Initiative Phase 2, and remind me and maybe some others what that involves?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. So within I'd say the past month, we have started discussions within CPHD with partners in human services. We need to reach out next to economic development, to parks and recreation. Those conversations will inform the drafting of a scope, which we will then put out to try and get a consultant to help us with this work.
I heard the consultant again. It's okay. All right.
In the conversations to date,
Yeah.
I think a few things have come through. Some really insightful conversations with our partners in DHS about some of the challenges. About there are pools of funding available for subsidized slots, but challenges to actually get. Encourage and induce certain providers to accept those slots when they could accept non-subsidized clients or customers, for example. And so looking at challenges and opportunities with how to address that, are there county resources and facilities that, could factor into that equation? That's one example. There's also been an ongoing discussion about, potential consideration of, additional density through the zoning ordinance for provision of space for childcare. So we have begun the conversations. I think we've had more work ahead of us. One, I think, thing that we could perhaps even address, I would expect we could address before consultant support, would be taking another look at the use permits that are still required for the family home providers between, I think, 10 and 12, and looking to do something similar with those as we had done with the 5 to 9 previously.
Yeah.
So an array of opportunities is just working through.
That's excellent, thank you, and that we're not going to plunge ahead and solve a problem that maybe isn't the one that we really need to be solving. Appreciate it, thank you.
Sure, Ms. Crystal.
I just wanted to make one comment. I am a little disappointed that it is in 2024 on the work plan. Understand why that's necessary. Just wanted to say, since I won't be here then, for the record, just to elevate something that I have shared with staff before, which is I really hope that we can keep the focus in that study on affordable childcare. And if we're talking about incentives, as far as I'm concerned, actual just provision of space for childcare, looking to childcare operators as tenants, that's table stakes, right? I don't think we should be incenting or looking for ways to incent that at all. I think that the really key thing is exactly as Mr. Fusarelli talked about. It is hard for providers to take our subsidy program, or the state subsidy program. I know there is more we can do, and we'll probably talk about with DHS to overcome some of those barriers. But when it comes to using our zoning tools, giving bonus density, that type of thing, in the same way that we don't necessarily incent the creation of market rate housing, even though it is absolutely necessary and good. We incent the creation of affordable housing, and I really think that paradigm for childcare is important too as the study goes forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. All right. With that, I think just like to extend our thanks to Chairs Davis, Malakoff, and Patel. Thank you for joining us, sharing those perspectives. Very important for our conversation. We could, of course, spend a lot more time here, but hopefully, colleagues, you accept my gentle facilitating, because we not only have our housing program, but then our also entire Department of Human Services upcoming during this session. So thank you all and have a great day. And Devanshi, get some rest.
Oh my God.
Right?
Christian the Hammer Dorsey.
What time?
We're going to try to do it earlier the better. I'll be up at 6 if I have to.
We might be able to do 6. Yeah.
So we've had a changing of the guard here. I'm gonna turn it over to, I'm waiting for the look from Ann that she's ready. And Venezia is here, and along with Anita Friedman, to start our conversation on housing. So over to you, Ms. Venezia.
Always love the collaborative nature of this joint presentation. It's awesome.
Feel free to talk about the weather. Okay, I think I'm good. How's everyone doing today?
We're well. How are you?
Great. I know we have a lot of information to cover, and we still have a whole nother department to go after this, so I'll try to go through this as quickly as I can. So good afternoon, I'm Ann Venezia. I'm the county's housing director. And in this budget segment focused on housing, Anita and I are going to share how DHS and CPHD work together to support greater housing affordability and stability in Arlington. And we're going to talk about the lovely spring weather for just a moment while we wait our slides to be projected. They're really good slides, so I think you're going to be
Filibuster
really
no more.
excited.
We got them.
Yeah.
We got them. You're ready to go.
We're good. Excellent. Okay. Trying to see where
Behind you. They're teasing you.
There we
There we go.
Excellent.
This always happens with this presentation. I don't know why.
It's because it's me and Anita that this happens. Okay, so this is an overview slide that you saw during the county manager's presentation on his proposed budget. Anita and I will be covering these proposed budget amounts in greater detail now. Next slide. Affordable housing remains one of Arlington's biggest challenges, and Arlington's investment in and care of these communities reflects the county's commitment to racial equity, as well as where additional work is still needed. With many people in our community facing urgent threats to housing, solutions must balance support for individual needs with efforts to increase supply and ensure the supply is well maintained. CPHD and DHS work together to meet this demand for housing affordability by creating programs that complement each other to support Arlington's low-income households. For instance, Committed Affordable Units, or CAFs, secured by CPHD, help provide a supply of units for DHS's housing grants and permanent supportive housing clients. Meanwhile, DHS subsidies and case management help, as well as eviction prevention resources, fill the affordability gap for CAF households and improve housing stability. Collaboration is also seen in ongoing efforts like the Barcroft, where DHS and housing staff work together to focus on individual living situations by identifying resident needs for rental assistance and other support. It's important to emphasize how this collaboration between CPHD and DHS is part of an overarching strategy for affordable housing in Arlington. Next slide. I have the privilege of kicking off today's joint presentation on housing by discussing the county's Affordable Housing Investment Fund, or AHIF. The county is a mission-driven lender, and the primary goal of the AHIF program is to create and preserve CAFs. AHIF is the county's main vehicle to both preserve and create long-term affordable housing by making low-interest loans to developers. With Arlington's AHIF program, the county historically has decided to use these funds as cash flow loans, meaning the county is repaid as property funds are available. And since AHIF's inception in 1988, and not including Barcroft, the county board has allocated $457 million for over 120 loans to date. And with this loan model, since the inception of the program, we've received approximately $150 million in loan repayments, and 43% of the county's loans have paid in full. For fiscal year 24, the county manager proposes $9.7 million in ongoing funds for AHIF. And while one-time funds aren't proposed for fiscal year 24, this proposal retains level ongoing funds for this important program. Next slide. With the AHIF model, we've had a number of accomplishments these last few years. For example, the county's CAF portfolio grew 28% between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 22, from 8,650 units to over 11,000 units. And during the same time period, the number of CAFs affordable to households earning less than 30% of the area median income doubled. Additionally, to improve oversight of the county's investment, CPHD Housing increased housing quality standards CAF inspections from 5% of the portfolio to over 20%, even with the growth I mentioned a moment ago, between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 23. And all of these accomplishments occurred during a national pandemic. Next slide. As we anticipate our full funding picture for fiscal year 24, it's important to consider the county's commitment to the Barcroft community. As you may recall, the county assisted Jair Lynch by using a $150 million line of credit to support the purchase of Barcroft Apartments, which consists of 1,334 1-, 2-, and 3-bedroom units. Staff continues to work with the Jair Lynch team to review the master financing and development plan they submitted in October. And while higher interest rates and increased construction costs make the financial models more challenging at Barcroft, we still anticipate being able to deliver on all of the commitments the county made in 2021, namely, to retain all 1,334 affordable units with no displacement of legacy residents, regardless of income, household size, or immigration status. Staff will provide briefings to board members later this month and have a more detailed update to share with the Barcroft stakeholders in April. In fiscal year 24, Barcroft debt service on the $150 million county line of credit is projected to be $7.8 million. As part of the county's acquisition loan agreement, Jair Lynch must pay 1% interest on the outstanding balance of the county loan. And so as a result, we anticipate a $1.5 million interest payment on the outstanding county loan balance in fiscal year 24, which can be applied to this debt service obligation. And pending future interest rates, we anticipate debt service amounts may increase in out years. Next slide. Another important piece of our fiscal year 24 funding picture is the Columbia Pike TIF. The Columbia Pike TIF was established in 2013 to help finance affordable housing initiatives in support of the Columbia Pike Neighborhoods Area Plan. Since its establishment, and as of the start of this fiscal year, the Columbia Pike TIF has generated $4.1 million in revenue. Further, this TIF has assisted 3 housing projects to date with approximately $1.5 million in financing. For fiscal year 24, the county manager recommends that the outstanding TIF balance plus revenue collected in fiscal year 24 be used to support the Barcroft debt, and these amounts total approximately $5.3 million. Next slide. This slide summarizes all of these funding pieces for the board's consideration. The county board's annual appropriation to AHEF is one piece of the county's multifamily development loan fund. This slide shows how developer contributions, loan repayments, federal funds, and the Columbia Pike TIF outlined on the previous slide also support the county's loan fund for multifamily development. While all of these sources for fiscal year 24, the projected county budget is $22.3 million. This slide also demonstrates the projected debt service needs for both Barcroft and Buckingham Village's 3 debt service payments, which are $7.8 million and $2 million respectively, for a total of $9.8 million. After considering these debt service obligations, the anticipated net budget for AHEF is approximately $12.5 million in fiscal year 24. Next slide. To wrap up, I wanted to highlight our housing quality standards, or HQS inspections work, which is a key component of the county's long-term strategies for improved oversight and tenant support at aging CAF properties, which was released in April 2022. For the benefit of the board and the community, I wanted to share that our annual progress report for these strategies is anticipated in May 2023 and will be shared in the Affordable Housing Master Plan annual report in future years. Staff continues to monitor the health of CAF properties through physical and financial inspections. And through the fiscal year 23 budget process, approximately $200,000 was allocated to increase property inspections capacity. As a result, CPHD Housing hired a third-party inspections firm to inspect approximately 2,000 additional units in 2023. CPHD Housing will work with the county manager to continue support for this work in fiscal year 24. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anita to discuss some of DHS's housing programs and associated budgets for fiscal year 24.
Thank you and good afternoon, members of the County Board, Manager Schwartz, colleagues. The DHS side of the House is focused on providing the rental subsidy supports and supportive services to ensure that our lowest income members of the community are able to maintain affordable and decent housing. In FY 2024, and some of you have had a preview of this eviction prevention work already, we are requesting a one-time amount of $3 million for eviction prevention funds and $600,000 in ongoing. So far to date, just so you know, eviction prevention remains high. In this fiscal year alone of 2023, $5.4 million has been dispersed to over 1,200 households. That's as of February. We also know that these households are predominantly BIPOC, 44% are Latino households, and 26% are Black, and they primarily reside in 22204. The reason that we have this high expenditure this year is that the rent relief portal of the state ceased to function or have any funding as of May of this last year. Nonetheless, there had been determinations by the state of approvals for rental relief. They sent out notices to households that funding was no longer available. Some of our neighboring jurisdictions decided not to assist those households. Arlington went ahead and assisted those households that still had rental arrearages and had been promised by the state to remain in their housing. So we have been spending at a higher than expected rate. Last summer, if you remember, we had some conversations about how to sort of bring the eviction prevention program back towards pre-pandemic levels. Pre-pandemic levels, we had, on a busy year, we'd have $1 million of eviction prevention going out the door. So we took a phased approach, and last October, we lowered the area median income threshold from 80% to 50% AMI. We sent out notifications to all households who had received eviction prevention before. Then as of January 1st, just now recently, we put in a cap of $7,000 per household for the calendar year in terms of the maximum amount of eviction prevention funding they can get. We're also requiring that there be a notarized lease, a 5-day notice to pay or quit, proof of financial hardship, a mandatory referral to the Arlington Employment Center, and that the maximum rent that amounts that we can consider when people are approaching are 150% of the fair market rents. Nonetheless, we still have evictions happening. Every Thursday, there's an eviction docket. Our staff from the Community Assistance Bureau attend, along with Legal Services of Northern Virginia. We work very closely with the landlords and the courts to ensure that if there is a chance that that a family can have their arrearages taken care of and their eviction be stayed or eliminated, we do that. We are working with landlords to better understand, so they can better understand our policies and our limits. And we will continue to work with APA, AHC, and all of the other landlords to ensure as much as possible that the households are not adversely affected. Next slide. Housing grants. Well, that's our favorite program. Housing grants is one of the key tools of Arlington's housing affordability. As you know, the committed affordable units that are produced through AHIF are largely targeted to 50 to 60% of AMI, although there's more that are now getting lower. But housing grants brings the affordability down to around 30% of area median income by providing a subsidy. This coming fiscal year 2024, we are requesting a $2.4 million in one-time funds for a total of $14.4 million. Actually, this is where we expected to, we are in 24 where we expected to be in 23. We have not expended at the same rate. And the reason is that when the COVID criteria that we had that had loosened the work requirements for working families, when that expired, if you remember that expired this past year, we had a little bit of a dip, and then people went off the housing grants, and we had reapplications once people established their work requirements. So you can see that in the orange line where the dip is. So we're going to be at 1551. We project households to be served in FY24 for the $14.4 million. You also have in your, well, should have been distributed to you, our annual updates of the housing grants history, which is an orange handout, and also a green handout that has a...
We receive no handouts.
No? Well, Corey can probably remedy that. Managers on it.
Full service manager.
They're not made, are they online? No.
Should have been handouts.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they got to, but in any case, these are our, I will have them sent to you. These are our every year we present our history of housing grants over the last 5 years and the snapshot of who is currently in housing grants. So that's coming to you in a theater near you, I hope.
Have it electronically, so we're good.
I think so.
Okay.
Housing grants program history?
Yes, program history. Orange has an orange line and housing grants program snapshot. So it basically shows you that of the 15, of the current number of households enrolled, we have about 32% who are 65 and older, 42% are folks with disabilities, and 26% are working families. And the average annual income of folks are very, very low. Working families have an annual average income of $33,000, 781. People with disabilities and aging, and the 65 and older, around $16,000 a year. So we're dealing with extremely vulnerable populations. We can go back to the housing grant slide. The growth for next year is expected to be, or from this year to next, is 4.9%. Okay. I need the slide that has the Mars coming up. So the maximum allowable rents of people who have housing grants keep up with the 60% HUD AMI rate. That was something that the manager adopted in FY 2020. Prior to that, if you remember, there was 10 years where it never had increased and people could no longer find apartments that were affordable. This has allowed people to find and access more affordable, a broader range of affordable units. The housing grant study, I'm sure you're all anxious to hear about that. So last year you said, Mr. Manager, we need a housing grant study. And the manager said to me, Anita, get on it. So we started by contracting a consulting company, Rheingold, and they did an extensive outreach to the community, focus groups with applicants, current participants, past participants, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. We did telephone surveys. We did interviews with key folks in the county government, and we also got a developmental, a person on a developmental assignment to be the study coordinator who came from DES. Where she is doing extensive regional and national literature review. We are reviewing the history. We are reviewing the rental household history, and we are going to have very soon for you an update with recommendations, and we will have a community forum after we have those recommendations, and we will deliver to you by the summer a final report. And there's, of course, preliminarily, there are things in there that are changes to eligibility criteria, certain special populations that people would like to assist, previously incarcerated or youth aging out of foster care. There are recommendations about how we manage the program, how to make it more user-friendly, more customer service-oriented, more seamless in terms of the application process. All of that will be incorporated into the report that we give to you this summer. And then you will decide, what you want to do. Okay, housing choice vouchers. Now, Housing Choice Vouchers, everyone knows, is a fully federally funded program, 100% federal from HUD. And this shows basically that, the amounts per average subsidy are going up. They're much higher than, housing grants. Housing grants is in the 700s. This is in the 1,200 now. The households that are enrolled are 1,528, or projected to be. In FY24, we actually have, though, over 1,700 vouchers. The reason we can't lease them all up is because our budget doesn't allow us to lease it all up, because with 1,528 vouchers, we will already have expended the cost per voucher is so expensive that you can't go over your budget. The other exciting thing about Housing Choice Vouchers this year is that we are porting in 141 additional vouchers for seniors living in Culpeper Gardens. If you remember when Culpeper Gardens was redeveloped and there were additional vouchers put into there, 141, we didn't have the capacity to manage that program. So Fairfax County managed it for us for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. That's going to bring up our grand total of vouchers to 1848. Next slide. Permanent supportive housing. There's no additional funding requests for FY24. We do have currently, or we will have in the base budget, $3.6 million. We also have successfully garnered federal and state funding coming from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services and other monies from HUD. So we're expected to serve 379 households. This is an evidence-based model, high number of previously homeless. Year over year, 93% of participants retain their housing. Average housing tenure is 5.6 years. We do have a pretty high wait list now, 65 clients on our wait list. It's taking longer to find units. There's high acuity within the population itself, in terms of behavioral health issues, but also there's the scarcity of the units that are available. Although, we work with CPHD to enter into agreements to procure those. Next slide. 2 more items. One is HQS inspections. HQS is the housing quality standards that's been adopted by HUD. That's the level of inspections that CPHD did for last year of 2,000 units. We are requesting $100,000 for local funds for permanent supportive housing inspections, and from Housing Choice Voucher, we're going to use $100,000 of our administrative funds to inspect those units. We have no set inspection people in permanent supportive housing. Case managers who are supposed to focus on tenancy issues, helping the household maintain and resolve their instability issues, they are the ones who currently do the inspections. So we believe that it would be much better if we had a contracted professional vendor who can conduct HQS at move-in and annual recertification to ensure that there's quality standards that are enforced, because these units often have a lot of issues upon inspection. And we're also going to work with landlords to ensure that all the agreements reflect the kinds of standards that we believe should be met through HQS. Next and final slide. Landlord engagement analyst. So I think we were discussing landlords before, and without the landlords, without their cooperation, we can't place people into the units. So it's really behooves us to have a person who can focus on engaging with the landlord community. And I'm not just talking about APA and AHC, I'm talking about the multitude of, private landlords that are out there, so that they can understand the different housing programs we have, the requirements, the payment standards, have good communication. We can provide them with technical assistance when they need it, or supports for the tenants. So we have a request in here for 1 management analyst to provide landlord engagement training and support. It would be funded 60% by Housing Choice Voucher and 40% local funds. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Ms. Venezia, we appreciate it. Let's see, of course, we'll have our Housing Commission hopefully present. Is Mr. Macbeth here today? Please make your way up to the front. And also Mr. Wimbush, I see from our Tenant Landlord Commission. Come on up. You and Kellen can trade after you both do your thing. All right, take it away, Mr. Macbeth.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for. There we go. Okay. Thank you, staff, for preparation of this budget and the presentation, and thank you, county board members, for consideration of what I'm about to say. Let me start by saying that the Housing Commission meets tonight, so we've not had a chance to officially discuss and adopt feedback for the county board related to the budget, but we have circulated the comments that I'm about to share tonight. So at least the commissioners are aware and have no objection to them. So I wanted to start by saying that we appreciate the stable funding for the housing grant program as well as permitted supportive housing. I think we're very much looking forward to the recommendations coming out of the housing grant work group, as was discussed, and as you are very well aware, that many more residents are housing cost burdened in our community than our current eligibility criteria for housing grants allow to be helped. So we're very much hoping that those recommendations will help us on a path to serve more people with housing grants. We do have a number of concerns about the budget. I think the first is AHIF. So the proposed AHIF levels of 9.7 million are approximately half of what was approved last year by the board, which was 18.7 million. And while the 9.7 million is adequate to fund the ballooning Barcroft debt service, as well as debt service for Buckingham, and to also pay for things like Crystal House, it doesn't include a lot of upcoming needs that we know that we will have in future years. So at the current levels, it basically will not fund any future CAF development. And we view that as a problem if we're going to try and meet our affordable housing goals in our community that we've already agreed to as part of the Affordable Housing Master Plan. And we know, for instance, that the Serrano is going to be coming up soon for either rehabilitation or redevelopment. That's probably going to result in an AHIF request that at current funding levels of 9.7 million, we will not be able to pay for. And I think that's an area, especially as we look at some of the older properties, as well as some other developments for CAFs that we know are coming down the pipeline, that we want to make sure we have enough funding to support those in future years, and in continuing to invest in AHIF at the levels that we saw last year is really critical to ensuring that beyond the existing debt service requirements and the projects that we've already committed to as a community, that we're preparing for the other projects that we know are coming and are absolutely necessary and critical to meeting our affordable housing supply goals, especially at a time that I think was previously discussed as well, construction costs and interest rates are increasing. It's becoming more expensive for affordable housing development, and our community partners who are doing that development are going to need more resources and support to be able to produce more CAF units for our community. Additionally, we are concerned about the staff capacity when it comes to implementation of the long-term strategies for improved oversight and tenant support at aging CAF properties and the commitments that were made last spring, as well as being able to implement the recommendations from the Joint Tenant Landlord Commission and Housing Commission Subcommittee on the Status of Aging Properties, aka the Serrano Report that was issued in October of 2022. As part of that, I think we were happy to see last year a commitment to step up our CAF inspections from just a fraction of the total volume of CAFs every year to doing this year 2,000 CAF inspections. Unfortunately, that money is not proposed to continue. And we think that considering the issues that we still hear from residents about aging CAF properties and maintenance concerns, and even what we've heard today about, the state of permanent supportive housing units in the county, that we need to be vigilant with our housing quality inspections at our CAF properties, and continuing to invest in outside resources, because the county doesn't have enough internal staff to adequately do those inspections on a yearly basis is very critical. And we also, I think this was a theme again with the planning division discussion as well, are looking for more resources for the CPHD housing division, whether that includes the deputy director position or other positions, to ensure that we have enough staff to follow through on commitments that have already been made, as well as new opportunities to better serve our especially low-income populations in this community and their housing needs. As part of that, we would really like the board and the manager to consider additional funding for establishing regular equity analysis for all housing and planning projects. As was mentioned, I think staff did a really great job on the missing middle housing study of doing a comprehensive equity analysis. That doesn't happen for any of our other planning or housing projects, but it is a critical piece of Arlington's commitment to equity to actually do an analysis and see how our programs impact different races, ethnicities, different populations throughout our community, and make sure that that's incorporated into the proposals that we're bringing forward as a community. We would also, urge the county board and the manager to look to the commitments that are likely to be made this summer for the Regional Fair Housing Plan, and that staff has worked very hard with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, as well as members of the county board, to put in place and think about the costs that will be associated with implementing these very much needed fair housing strategies and goals. And as part of that, I know this is kind of outside the realm of CPHD and DHS, but within the Office of Human Rights budget, there's $50,000 allocated for FY 2024 for a fair housing study, which I read as fair housing testing. And that hasn't been done since 2019. It's one of the county's, at least draft goals, to expand that to include not just race and national origin, but also disability. And I know many advocates have urged the county to do testing even beyond those areas, because housing discrimination is very real and is a major problem, as evidenced by the really comprehensive analysis done in the Regional Fair Housing Plan. So looking at expanding the categories that are part of the fair housing testing that will be done in 2024, we think is also important for the board and the manager to consider. And then again, lastly, just ensuring that we're providing adequate funding for the implementation of the county's developing strategic plan to functionally end homelessness in the next 4 years. I think DHS is doing great work in that regard, and I know it's not final yet, but looking at anything that can be done in FY 2024 to help put us on the right path and solid footing to achieve that goal as it's being outlined, or potentially sooner, because as we all know, functionally ending homelessness is an amazing thing for our community to potentially achieve, and anything we can do to invest in that, I think, is definitely worthwhile. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Macbeth. And if you wouldn't mind doing a little chair change. Indeed. Chair Wimbush, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Wimbush, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Tenant Landlord Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the County Manager's FY 2024 proposed budget. And I'd like to focus my comments in two areas. As the County Manager's proposed budget notes, in fiscal year 2023, the board made a one-time funding allocation of $150,000 to enable increased CAF and physical inspections leading to 400 units being brought into compliance. This effort by the Housing Division should be commended, but it does highlight continued challenges with our CAF properties. With this in mind, I ask the board to consider additional one-time funding to support expanded inspections beyond those already planned to ensure aging properties receive adequate attention, given continued resident concerns. Second, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic and national economic headwinds have placed an extraordinary strain on Arlington families. We commend the county manager's commitment of $3 million in one-time funding for eviction prevention. But as economic headwinds continue, the county board should consider additional one-time funds to ensure we can support those with the greatest need in our community. Finally, I just want to take a minute to thank and recognize the members of the Housing Division and DHS for their tireless work on behalf of residents and businesses in the county. It is sometimes easy to forget in the heat of public policy debates and a global public health emergency and the daily vagaries of life that county civil servants are like us, trying to make this place we live and work in better. And so for that, I say thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's not sully those words with our questions. So, colleagues, just with the check of time, mindful that we have DHS as well as, I believe, 4 advisory commission presentations yet to go. If you could sort of prioritize your budget focus questions first, and we'll see how we do before we maybe get into policy-related discussions. Thank you. All right, Ms. Crystal.
I'm going to try to be very brief, although just as a flag, I'd be interested in following up with the housing and tenant landlord. Both of you mentioned a desire for more resources for inspections or worry about money for inspections going away. And so if we have the opportunity, I believe we just got the presentation suggested that housing quality standards was adding $100K in housing choice voucher and $100K in local funding for inspections. Is that different than what our 2 commissions talked about?
Our request for $100,000 is for permanent supportive housing units and for housing choice voucher units.
So can I?
The question is for housing grants units. That's the advocacy is for
CAF
Can
units.
I speak to that for a second? Because I think this one is on me.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that I made a mistake, but when we're putting together the budget at the very end, it's not. This has to do with inspections and from the housing division, not DHS. DHS, we are adding resources there. I've made it clear to Ms. Venezia that I will make, we left $4.5 million unallocated on the table. Okay. I would say that when you ask me what my priorities are, that's the first take. We sort of missed that in the cleanup at the very end. Okay. And that even if we need more than that, my commitment made last year when we talked about this was that we would do whatever inspection regime that we needed to do to make sure that, we're addressing that first slide, talked about how we barely did any inspections 4 or 5 years ago. We're committed to doing as many as we have to do.
Okay, excellent. I also would just appreciate if we can figure out some way to clarify what we're talking about, because our permanent supportive housing units and the units in which people are using housing choice vouchers are all CAFs.
They are all CAFs.
So I think if we can just come up with some nomenclature, that will help me.
Yeah, so we're talking about CAFs beyond housing choice vouchers.
Right. There we go.
Yes.
I think I'm going to follow up in writing just with some questions about using the TIF balance in Columbia Pike. I want to get a sense of what the opportunity cost of that might be. It sounds like we've only ever used the TIF balances on affordable housing projects, but are there other things? This kind of crosses probably Columbia CPHD housing, maybe even a little DES. Sort of what else would we be thinking about using the TIF on? But I can follow up with that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. DeFerranti, and then we'll go to this side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for Kellen, for Mr. Macbeth, for your thorough points and detailed, and I may end up watching the video on that. I'm glad you mentioned homelessness. That's a huge project that's underway. On AHIF, Ms. Venezia, I think 12.5 million is the figure I think you mentioned. If you add the AHIF related, is that correct?
So what we're estimating is that the net budget, if you take all sources in the multifamily loan fund, which includes for fiscal year 24, we're including the Columbia Pike TIF balances in that, our federal monies, our loan repayments, developer contributions, all of the usual sources that we mentioned, in addition to the appropriation that you all may consider when you do your budget adoption in April. And so what we did is we took all of those sources, we netted out what the debt service estimates are, both for Barcroft and also for BB3, and then the net budget remaining, we're estimating to be about $12.5 million.
Great, that's helpful. I do, of course, the Serrano is always on my mind, but I also mentioned Melwood earlier. There's a pipeline question with respect to AHIF, and so I know we've done one time in the past. I don't know whether we'll have a ton of one time, but I'll follow up on that. And then the last place that I'll follow up, I really appreciate the one-time request. We seem to have more one-time funding, AKA Deputy Director, which is on my mind for next budget year, not this one. But I think there's, in page 722 and 723, I think our CAF inspection success, even with the 400, is still in the 40% range. And 40% in my algebra 8th grade class was great for me, but, you know, on some tests. But, you know, and 40, so honestly, 40% may not be bad. I don't know enough about the inspection rates, but I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that at all.
Absolutely. So as a commitment that we made through the CAF strategies that, again, were released in April of last year, our goal is to inspect 20% of the units that are in our CAF portfolio. Now, when we use those numbers, to Ms. Crystal's point earlier, that would be in addition to any inspections that are done through Anita's programs and her staff. So all in, you know, we are probably getting closer to, I don't know, 25, 30% perhaps all in. But again, what we're aiming to do is for when we isolate the portfolio that is CAF alone, does not have a DHS client in it, that would be subject to Anita's inspections, we're aiming for 20%.
Great.
Which we will achieve this year.
Great, that's great on the number inspected, and I'll follow up on the number of success. I'm kind of interested in, you know, the one-time request, and if we got 400 done this year, if, I think, I may have misread, but 41.8% is the amount successful. So in the interest of time, unless you opine on it, I'll follow up on that one, just to understand how many of our inspections are successful and what we need to.
You're talking about after, like, the number of units that pass initial inspection?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I think, to the chair's point, and if it's okay with you, with all that you do, I'll just follow up on that in writing, if that's okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Please, no one use the intel about Mr. DeFerranti's algebra scores as opposition research. You know, that might have been TMI, as the kids say.
I'm sure that was just for effect. That was just for effect. So I'm going to follow up with Mr. DeFranti's questions a little bit more. And by the way, I appreciate the briefing earlier today, and I know we're going to, Zan, thank you for everything you're doing. And actually, I appreciate Mr. Winbush's thank you, because everybody's been working really hard. So to drive down, so if I'm just public looking at this and I see 61% passed inspection and initial move-in, so that means people moved in anyway, even though they didn't pass, right? So if you want to talk about, I mean, what does it mean to not pass? Because the numbers here look like, oh my heavens, what are we allowing people to live in terrible conditions? I assume that's not the case.
No, that's not the case.
Many a house in an apartment where it needed work before after I moved in. So could you just explain that in case?
Sure. What that means, basically, units are inspected when someone moves in or when their recertification is taking place. We don't let people move into units that are not up to standards. It just means they have to be re-inspected. The landlord has to make modifications to improve the specific deficiencies. And it will.
Ms. Freeman, if I could, just to relay that could be anything from a structural repair. It could also mean an inoperable smoke detector, which needs a battery.
That has to get, yes, right. Thank you, yeah.
Right, so the issue is that for permanent supportive housing, we don't have dedicated inspecters. In Housing Choice Voucher, for the 1,500 households we have 2 inspectors. For Housing Choice, for permanent supportive housing, we have no inspectors. We train our case managers, who are sort of social worker types, to actually do the inspection. Okay. That leaves a lot to be desired, right? It leaves, because they are being trained in an area that is not their area of expertise.
But they'd pick up something really egregious, right, which is the
Yes,
standard
and so
thing,
when
right? Yeah.
things do not pass inspection, it just delays the ability of a client to be able to move into the unit. And,
Okay, yeah, thank you. I was thinking, just because other people watch this and they don't see it, you might have something like 100% meets standards, whatever. You see what I'm saying? It
Yes.
just looks, it
This is
creates
just
an
showing
impression
you-
that I don't think is true, and I just wanted to.
right, this is not showing what the outcome is after the reinspection.
Yeah, and the problems that they find are not huge major things, so, yeah, thank you. Huge major things, we don't let them move in, right? That's what I wanted to hear.
Yes.
And to Vice Chair
Done.
Garvey's point, which is a good point, it might be good at some point to just share with us, so we can then share with the community what are the national statistics on passing HUD inspections initially, because it's not very high. So it's not like we're standing as a
No.
particular outlier.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, to your last point, we've seen just across the river what happened a couple of months ago when we found out, when they found out, the real state of in the DC Housing Authority and the problems that were associated with that. So inspections are really, really critical. Having worked myself for a short while on something very similar, we had a kind of a plan on how to inspect, who to prioritize. So it went by the age of the building, the last renovation, the last replacement of appliances, etc. So there was a list of flags that were prioritizing and make a lot more out of this 20%, which is it's more than 2,000 units actually. So. And so I would ask you if you have some stats on that to show us a little bit the modus operandi there. It would be very helpful to have. It would be helpful to have this. Definitely the third point, the 53% that's likely to fail in requiring multiple inspections. So this puts an additional strain to our system, right?
I think the intent of this data was to show you the strain of the workload on the existing case managers.
As a second, I want to associate myself on the discussion about the opportunity costs on the use of TIF to, pay for the lion's share of the debt service on Barcroft this year, because this is not going to repeat. This source won't be there. I mean, I wouldn't, put it in the same basket like TIF. This is still an extra. We dedicated that money when we instituted the TIF for something like what happened in Barcroft. We wanted to have this 12 funds actually funded with that, which was intentional. So it's not a appropriation out of scope. I understand that, but still hasn't. It still is a problem for me, and I want to know what the trade-offs could be. And third, and most importantly, for me right now, we are seeing AMI has been increasing. That means that several households have been depressed into lower AMI brackets, and discussing that with the residents in Barcroft especially, but also in other places, I've seen that this puts an additional strain to how we have to plan for our AHIF money. So do you anticipate that we have enough leverage or enough financial ability to deal with the additional pressure, so we have more 30%, 40%, 50% AMI households apparently than we anticipated, which, our target is always 60% AMI, but it seems that we have more under that, and we don't want to displace anybody, right?
I'm happy to respond to a few of those questions. So regarding the Columbia Pike TIF, which I'll back up for a moment because I think you asked about our inspections and how we prioritize which properties we may be teeing up for inspection. Our inspections team, our compliance staff within the county, they do an excellent job. They have a whole spreadsheet triaging based on just the factors that you mentioned, not only the age of the property, but the timing of the most recent renovation. So which properties may have the greatest needs, and whether it be capital needs, maintenance needs, that sort of thing. And so they really do prioritize those properties when selecting which may be teed up for the 20%. And so, for instance, a project that was newly built a year ago likely won't be in that 20% this year. We're going to be looking at properties that had their last renovation, several years earlier. So there is a prioritization that happens. And I think it really does enable us to see the properties that maybe do have the greatest needs and work with those owners, not only on the immediate needs, but really to talk through what are the longer-term capital plans for the property. So it opens the conversation. So I think that it really presents a good opportunity for us to push into those properties and, again, see what the needs are. You also had asked about the Columbia Pike TIF and what opportunity costs there may be in using the existing balances as well as any new revenue towards the Barcroft debt service. I will say staff back in the fall started having those conversations about potentially using those balances for Barcroft. Barcroft is exactly the type of project that really was envisioned for using this source of funds. And so we thought that it actually is a really good, again, opportunity to apply this funding source to the very project that it was envisioned to help support. And so we, when the county manager made that proposal to use those balances for the Barcroft debt in fiscal year '24, we think that's very consistent with what staff was envisioning. And as you mentioned, for the existing balances, once those are used, they won't replenish necessarily, but through new revenue. But we do anticipate that ongoing ability for the new revenue, which will be somewhere between 1.4 and 1.7 million over the next few years, that could continue to be a source for this debt service. And your last question, which was a little more complicated, I may lean on Anita as well for the last one, but in terms of how are we continuing to serve households that are at lower AMI levels, so they have greater affordability needs. It's a very challenging problem. I will lean on some of the messaging that we shared during the presentation, which is that it really is a combination of trying to bring in on the capital side units that are affordable as deeply as we can afford to make them. And I know that some of what we're considering when we're looking at the long-term plan at the Barcroft, for instance, how can we, and also for Crystal House I'll offer, how can we try to go as deep as we can on the capital side to take a little pressure off of Anita and her budgets. The programs that Anita's staff provide, though, do help fill some of those gaps. And so I think we're just going to have to continue that conversation. And Anita, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but it is a challenge.
Well, I think that as long as I've been doing these budget presentations, that's always been the question. How do we deepen affordability? And, do we invest $1 in AHIF or $1 in, that was the old question from, I think, Jay Facet, right? Or in housing grants. And really, we need both, because it's not possible to buy down, I think, the affordability as deeply as 30% for most of the time in the units, and so we have to supplement it through the grants.
To close us out in this conversation, I'll make a slight editorial point. I think that's one of the hopes and promises for Barcroft as we develop that partnership, is to see if we can do a better job at creating on the capital side some of those deeper levels of subsidy, so it reduces the pressure on other programs like housing grants, not so that we can spend less money on them, but we can ensure that we are meeting the greater needs of the community. So thank you all for that. I'm unfortunately going to cut this short, even though I know that as a policy interest, we could go on for a long time, and prepare for the Department of Human Services conversation.
So, Mr. Chair, while Anita is getting ready, I wanted to take the opportunity just to make a few remarks. I don't do it often during budget work sessions. I hope you're listening, Anita. You're going to hear from Anita whether it's eviction prevention, substance use, mental health, child care, housing grants, public health, child protective services, developmental disability services. The day-to-day core work of the Department of Human Services has grown and become more complex. And these are the core services to our community. And I will say that every turn, these services respond directly to the question of who benefits, whose burden, and how do we know? And so my budget reflects those priorities. You're going to hear from Anita. We're actually making additions to her budget. It is a statement of my priority, and I think her priority. We've talked a lot about budget reductions. I think there's one in your department, but that has to do with not needing funds for services that are no longer being asked for. And the other thing is, I wanted to compliment the Department of Human Services for being able to quickly respond to what we've seen in the last 6 weeks, addressing what's going on in our community with youth mental health. And I'm going to steal your thunder, Anita. The Crisis Intervention Center is going to open this month. Yay! Wow. And, I'll just say this for Anita and her team. They do all this while they're trying to recruit social workers and deal with clients. And she perseveres.
I'm still here because of Mark.
Oh.
Anyway, and I love Arlington, but thank you once again for allowing us to present to you our DHS budget. I'm joined today by my colleague, Deborah Warren. You all know her. She's the Deputy Director of the Department of Human Services. We only have one Deputy Director, and she occupies the position of the CSB Executive Director. Now, how she does that is a miracle. We are also joined by Glenda Pittman, who is the Finance and Information Systems Division Director, and our much revered Finance and Management Bureau Director, Corey Travis. On the phone, we have Maimuna Ba-Duckenfield, Aging and Disability Services Division Director, Carol Layer, our new Behavioral Health Division Director. Tabitha Kelly is on vacation. She's our Child and Family Services Division Director. So is Brooke Hammond-Paris on vacation, Economic Independence. And in the back, our esteemed Dr. Ruben Varghese from Public Health, who led us through the COVID pandemic, and we're here on the other side, so hopefully. Okay, so our department, as Mark mentioned, is vast. We provide human services from prenatal to the end of life to 50,000 residents through over 100 programs. We operate through 5 customer-facing service divisions, and then the director's office, which has some of the backbone services. In 2022, our DHS leadership and staff made a decision to modify our vision, mission, values to center race. You can see them up there, the vision and mission, because the reason we lead with race is because we are involved in many different systems like health, education, housing, employment, all of which, if you look at outcomes for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, tend to be worse than their white counterparts. And so we believe that by partnering with the BIPOC community, we can create more equitable access to our resources, and we will intentionally remove barriers that we perceive are elements of systemic racism. We're very committed to this vision, mission, values, and let me go on to what we're doing in more detail. Next slide. So I think you all know, I've mentioned this before, but we have a very, very robust staff team called REAP, Racial Equity Advancement Partners. There's about 40 staff from all levels of DHS who are champions and advocates for racial justice and model anti-racist behaviors. We have 3 subcommittees. One is capacity building, developing a facility and training for staff. One is called culturally and racially responsive practices, where they've developed self-assessment tools for programs to examine their responsiveness to equity in their work. And another, it's communications and community engagement, which provides a newsletter and socializes information. Two really amazing highlights for me for this year that I want you to know about. We're undergoing a SWOT analysis. And you remember the training from Bird Guess, and he introduced that SWOT analysis tool. So we took that, and then our culturally and racially responsive committee modified based on our values, adding specific questions for the areas of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we are examining 4 domains in our department: employment, how we hire and retain people; finance and procurement, how we budget, how we procure our services through external contractors; how we deliver services; and how we engage with the community. And we're doing an intentional SWOT analysis with the DHS leadership team. Then each division is doing it with their leadership team, and basically so on and so on. And we are going to cull all this information, and we actually have a person who does this, collects 400, 500 comments. I'll have to show it to you in greater detail. Summarizes it by category, prioritizes it. We have been voting on what our priorities will be, and it's going to be all mapped out in a strategic plan for action to be implemented in the next 3 years. We also have taken all of our performance, 87% of our performance measurement data is now disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So all those performance measurement plans that are linked to the budget, you can find them there. So that's exciting work. And now I'm going to move on to DHS initiatives, of which we have many. Deborah Warren's going to talk to you about how we've responded to the mental health crisis, and we still are.
Thank you, and good afternoon, County Board members and Manager Schwartz. It has been a very busy year focusing on crisis services, on enhancing what we currently have, and developing new initiatives. And yes, the Crisis Intervention Center, it's very exciting. I wanted to share with you what we've done to get to where we are today. We have done a tremendous amount of work under the leadership of Carol Layer, the Behavioral Health Division Director, and Arnisha Moody, the Bureau Director, first of all, we just received word that we have our license for 23-hour crisis stabilization. This is a really big deal because they changed the standards. They made them way more rigorous. Now, they do require 24/7 nursing coverage, and we are still working on the nursing coverage through a variety of strategies. We're going to be offering bonuses to nurses that are in DHS to provide coverage for vacant shifts, much as we're doing with our emergency services, where we have a number of vacancies, and offering bonuses to do that. We're trying to get temps. We still have positions that need to be filled, nursing positions that need to be filled. But currently, you should know that we have 10 to 15 walk-ins every single week, especially on the weekends. It's really crowded and requires a deep cleaning on Monday. And really exciting, we hired a behavioral health manager for the Crisis Intervention Center, so it will be organized, and the 19 staff will be carefully managed, and a nurse practitioner, which is very exciting because she is interested in having the CIC be a practicum site so that we can then generate a pipeline of nursing and future nurse practitioners. And we have trained all of our staff to distribute naloxone, and that's really important because just a couple of weeks ago, we saved an individual's life who actually was in a tree outside the CIC and got him down, and he had overdosed, and we were able to bring our training into bear. The other exciting thing that is being watched by the entire state is the special conservators of the peace aspect of the Crisis Intervention Center. So we do have round-the-clock security guards, but we have worked with the support of Corey, actually, on a contract with a vendor to hire individuals who have been trained through the Department of Criminal Justice to be the special conservators of the peace. And because that's kind of a long phrase, we call them SCOPs for short. But they go through a rigorous process of certification that involves the police chief, the court, Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and as a result, once they are certified, they can accept an individual under an emergency custody order. So this is a really big deal. An emergency custody order, for those of you who don't know, is generally issued by a magistrate, and it allows police to take custody of an individual for a mental health evaluation for up to 8 hours. So this way, with the certified SCOPs, the police can transfer custody to these individuals and leave, and we can do our evaluation. These individuals can also transfer these folks if they need to go to the hospital or, if they're detained, that kind of thing. So, that's a huge, it was a very complicated process to work through protocols and hire. We have 10 SCOPs and a supervisor already hired, and 7 of them have been certified. So this is huge progress. So we also, the other piece about the CIC is we're working with the fire police medical director around EMS support for medical clearance, and have been working through those protocols. So that's really good. On the negative side, our emergency services has a number of vacancies, which is really limiting our ability to provide mobile crisis response, co-responder service in partnership with the police, and our emergency, the ECC coverage. So that is something we are working on some strategies to address that. Our mobile outreach services team, funded with an earmark, we have hired 1 individual, and we have to hire a therapist for that team, and we are retrofitting a van, but we plan to do a phased approach and roll that service out very shortly once the peer is on board and oriented. So that's exciting, and we also hired a crisis intervention trainer, a training coordinator. So we've started training our law enforcement partners on how to manage behavioral health crises. And we hired a Marcus Alert coordinator who is kicking off that work in terms of working on the protocols for the levels of response for individuals in crisis. And then we have some significant regional efforts in terms of our call center, where calls to 988 have skyrocketed since last July. And we expanded our CR2, which is our community crisis regional response, to 24/7. The whole lifespan used to be just kids, and increased our staffing there. So that provides mobile crisis services in the community.
Thank you, Deborah. Switching to another topic, so you can see the vast array of efforts that are being put in place and that we have worked on. Deborah has worked on tirelessly over the last year, well, getting on 2 years now. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening with Medicaid, but it's big and a lot of work, okay? Medicaid unwinding. So during the COVID public health emergency, we were not allowed to review Medicaid eligibility cases or close any, unless a person moved away to another jurisdiction. Our numbers went from 18,000 and some odd in 2019 to 28,597 in 2022, a 52% increase. Federal emergency is over. Guess what? They want to unwind, that's what they call it, unwind all of those cases. Each and every case has to be re-reviewed for eligibility. That has started this month. We have until April 2024 to complete it. We do not have sufficient staff. The staff that we already have is already burnt out because the caseloads have gone up. We have high turnover in the eligibility staff because we're competing with neighboring jurisdictions that are offering more competitive salaries or better, closer work. So we're hiring on former employees, temps, offering overtime, and working on that, along with the fact that our SNAP caseload also went up during the pandemic by 85% in terms of applications, from 2,300 to 4,299, and participation went up by 54%. Also, due to the closure of the end of the pandemic, this month, every SNAP recipient will lose $82 a month due to the rolling back of the expanded benefits. Child care subsidy enrollment has gone up. That's a good thing, but it's by 133%. TANF has gone up by 181%. So we are facing, basically a tsunami in the Public Assistance Bureau. That's, I wanted to let you know, it's a lot of work. And it's going to cost money to hire all those temps. So, go ahead, Deborah.
All right, with regard to developmental disabilities, thanks to your generosity, we have a number of projects that are coming to fruition. One is our 1212 Irving Street it's been completely rebuilt to meet the needs of very high acuity individuals with developmental disabilities. It's going to be finished in 4 weeks. And we will be having an open house in June. We'll invite you all. We did a request for a proposal for the provider to operate the home. That closed yesterday, so we've got progress there. We're very excited about that, and I think it'll really be a model. We have a lot of pressure with individuals graduating from the APS system who need either day support or supported employment. And some individuals are not quite ready for employment when they come out of school. So to that end, we are establishing a community-based employment readiness program right at Sequoia Plaza, right on our floor, where our old lab used to be. We're taking that space, renovating it, and that will enable us to have 15 additional slots for those individuals. And it's really in line with best practice because it's community-based. And our goal for opening that is July 1. And we are prioritizing the grads, coming out of school right now. Let's see, Woodmont, which is one of our day support programs, has 30 clients currently, and we are expanding capacity for an additional 15 clients. Again, that will be more of a community-based service, so there'll be space for them. And of course, we've added a sensory room, which is very exciting. And then we are doing long-term planning for an additional day support program in Arlington. This came out of our PCG study, consultant study that we told you about last year. It was one of their recommendations, and we've narrowed down to a couple of possibilities. And then finally, it's DD Awareness Month, so go to Westover Library and check out the artwork done by our clients.
Okay. We're on to ARI, Arlington Addiction Recovery Initiative.
We're very proud of ARI. ARI is almost 6 years old. It'll be 6 years old this spring. We're very proud to announce, if you haven't seen it, that ARI was featured on the CBS Evening News nationally for their efforts on ensuring access to naloxone. So we are a national model. And they were also featured in Slate magazine and, of course, Arl Now. This cross-county, community-wide effort distributed almost 2,000 boxes of naloxone, which helps individuals who have overdosed, and it's life-saving, in 2022. And since July this year, we have already distributed 3,000 boxes of naloxone. Our goal is that every individual in Arlington get trained on how to administer Narcan, because you never know when you might come across somebody who has overdosed. It's free training and it's online. Check the website. We are also very excited that we have opioid emergency boxes similar to the AED boxes that you see at all our libraries, at Marymount University campus, our own campus, and just this week at the all APS high schools and the career centers. And the middle schools are next. So that's a great partnership that we've established with APS in the midst of this crisis. I think we're meeting with APS just about every day on something related to that. I do want to highlight that last year we had 87 overdoses, 17 of them were fatal. This year, but we did note that we had a 41% decrease in fatalities, and that is a direct result of our harm reduction efforts with the distribution of Narcan. However, last year, 10% of the overdoses were 18 and younger. So far this year, we've seen 50% of the overdoses are 18 and younger. So that is our top priority right there.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm sorry we're rushing, but, you know, we have a lot of material.
Given the
to
hour,
cover.
it's appropriate. It's fine.
Food security, not to be forgotten, started under Matt DeFerranti's chairpersonship. And you remember we had a heightened food insecurity during COVID. We decided, and the manager supported it, and you've supported the hiring of a coordinator who's been in place now 2 years. We did an extensive study with Urban Institute. We developed the first ever Arlington Food Security Strategic Plan, which was published last fall, and then recruited a new coalition of food security members that has 60 active members, including a lot of community folks with lived experience. In the budget, you will see a request for $150,000 NOFA for mini grants for food security to be directly applied to the priorities in the strategic plan, where we hope to expand access to food in different time frames that people need it, different culturally appropriate foods, and lay the groundwork to make more systemic change around food policy. We also have a VISTA volunteer who's coming to be a food security member with us this year. Eviction prevention, we've already discussed. I don't think we need to go through that. Let's go to family preservation and support.
Well, just briefly, this is our child welfare effort to really work with families to prevent children from going into foster care. We've increased our in-home and prevention services by 41%. And we see the numbers. So today we only have 58 children in foster care compared to 5 years ago. So we've cut that in half, which is really important because it's better for children, obviously, to grow up with their families, and that's what they want. And then we have, we're always developing new programs. In the last year, we developed our first episode psychosis program, which is staffed, up and running, serving 15 clients. Really important to intervene early. We just also developed our RAF dementia services. Now, this is a regional program that we manage, and it's the result of an $870,000 grant from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. We've hired 5 employees for this project and ramped it up in October, this just, by the way, just started July 1, so this is a big deal. And we're making great strides in education and training. The idea of this project is to support families who are caring for their loved ones with dementia at home, to prevent them from going into nursing homes.
Okay, next slide. So those are a few of our initiatives and accomplishments. We thought we'd take a moment just to address opioids and substance use specifically. These are ideas that are and potential programs that we have really come up with in the last
3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah. In response to the surge in the adolescent opioid problem. So Deborah will, and these are not fully vetted, but they're strong ideas with potential budget requests attached to them. It's not part of the existing FY24 budget.
And if it's okay with you, why don't we just, have this displayed for a minute? Let's chew on it, but let's not send conflicting signals to the community that these are in-place programs or in-place commitments, since
Right.
they're still being baked.
They're still being baked, exactly. Do you want us to go through after you review, or just sort of
High
just
level.
pass over?
High level.
Okay, high level.
High level. We have an opportunity for to add a behavioral health therapist through the Opioid Abatement Authority Fund.
This is an actual.
That's an actual.
That's an
That's an
actual
actual.
funded position through Opioid Abatement Authority.
And one of the things we want to do with that position, it enables us to double our existing OBOT treatment, office-based opioid treatment, from 20 to 40 individuals, and we would be able to provide medication-assisted treatment to youth 16 and older. You're not allowed to do it federally under 16. And also get a contractor, $45,000 for a contractor, to really ensure that we are implementing best practices and give us feedback. And then sort of the high level, what we are considering is we're talking about the possibility with the school system of having locally funded behavioral health therapists provide treatment actually in the schools. And one other piece is we are working regionally with the other community services boards on developing a medical withdrawal and residential program with the top priority being adolescents. We want to develop a 22-bed program for youth who have opioid dependence. We also are working on one for adults. We've developed that RFP, it's going out. And we also applied for a grant with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to support those programs.
So hopefully substantial good news to share at a future time in
Yes,
terms of
future
our
time.
additions to this.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next slide. We're moving right along. Okay, these are our budget highlights, but we already discussed the South Irving Group Home, so we don't need to do that. We don't need to discuss food security grants. I do want to bring to your attention something that you may not know about called CLASS. Another unfunded state mandate, along with the unwinding. Virginia Quality Birth Through 5 is the name of the Virginia's Quality Initiative for Childcare. They've now renamed it, rebranded it, and added a new component because it wasn't enough. We have a small and mighty team of 4 people who inspect our 193 licensed programs, right? And they do 2 inspections per year, that's 386 inspections, okay? Under this CLASS, Virginia Quality Birth Through 5, it is now being required to do 2 observations of each classroom within each center, right? So you could have 10 classrooms in a center, you could have 5, right? 2 per year. That's an additional 244 observations. So there's going to be a total of 630 visits. So we are requesting, and the manager has said we should move forward with the request to you for an additional child care specialist to do this work, because it can't be done without it. It's just not enough time in the day. That's what that is about. Food security. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry I'm rushing, but I feel compelled to. You're missing your kid's birthday dinner? No, that's not good. Now I'm going to feel guilty.
Let's keep it going and then
Okay.
we'll see.
All right. I just want you to know, the manager discussed in the beginning how much work we have taken on. This is the graph that represents the growth of our department, okay? We have exponentially grown over the past 5 years in response to the burgeoning critical needs of the community. It was the pandemic, the eviction prevention, the housing affordability, the behavioral health care, the opioid epidemic, homelessness, the Marcus Alert, the food security, the child care initiative. It's a lot, okay? And we keep on adding FTEs, for which we're very grateful, and the resources that we're getting, you can see there's a basically 32% growth in our expenditures over the last 5 years. Of course, we do generate quite a bit of revenue, 23% over the last 5 years. But the FTEs that we add are for direct services, right? We add a therapist, we add a child care licensor, we add a landlord engagement. We have not added commensurately the backbone help that is needed to make our department sustainable. And let me just tell you some fun facts. The current organizational structure that we have was created by Ron Carlee in 1998, okay, 25 years ago. It was great, and it's held out, but we're not the same agency 25 years later. And so we also I have the exact same staffing in the director's office that I had when Suzanne Eisner left. Okay, that was 7 years ago. Okay, so it's not tenable for the future sustainability and for succession planning. As you can see, we are looking at our plans. We want to be able to leave the department in good shape with a strategic plan, a solid strategic plan, with an organizational structure that can last the next 25 years, God willing. And so we're going to do some reorganization. We're going to do some reallocation internally. Public health is reorganizing based on its reflections during the pandemic, and we're going to be discussing with the manager and the Human Resources Department how we can move forward with this, right? Okay, so you'll hear more about that. Next, we don't want to miss the cake from the, okay, vacancy rates. All right, this is our current highlights of some of our current pain points in vacancies, okay? Because you need people to deliver services. You don't have the people, you can't deliver the service. Okay, so we have about 844 current positions allocated. Okay, even that's because we have these bits and pieces of FTEs. We have a relatively low, I think, vacancy rate. 11% is not too bad. But you can see in certain areas it's very high. Nurse practitioners, 50%. Behavioral health therapists, overall 22%. In child and family services, where we have all those opioid issues, 37% vacancy. Emergency services clinicians, still 21%, even though we're begging people and rewarding them to take these overnight shifts and shifts that are uncovered. Public assistance benefits workers, remember the Medicaid unwinding? 59% turnover, resigned in the last 2.5 years, okay? And so that's a problem, because when you have new staff and they're not trained up, you have inaccuracies. Your accuracy rate starts going down, and that brings attention from the, external parties. So we have to really think strategically, and we will be doing this. Michelle and Mark are supportive, and with Human Resources, how we can build in more, better kinds of packages of incentives, differential pay. You know, we pay the same level of salary to someone who is in an office-based clinical position as someone who's in the jail. And they're dealing with, you know, people who are incarcerated. We have no different pay differential for emergency services, even though they're working like all hours of the night. So we have to start looking at this very critically so that we can really incentivize. Otherwise, we will have wait lists, which we already have in Children and Family Services and are very likely to have in adult services. So that's my my plea. Next slide. Anything else that we're adding? Oh, this is our proposed changes, our budget changes. We have an increase of 6% overall, 183 million. That's a lot of money. I feel tremendous responsibility shouldering this. We have an increase of 21 FTEs. However, 15.25 of those are grant funded. And one is funded with the opioid abatement funds, and 5.85 are net tax support, but one of them is reallocated within our department. Next. These are the details of the proposed changes. The only one here I will point out is we are requesting a quality assurance manager for EID. We don't have anyone devoted to quality assurance in a division that is $43 million worth of funding and has programs like housing, employment, and all these safety nets. We need someone dedicated to quality, to data and timeliness and accuracy of our data. And the security coordinator is something that you had approved before. We're still recruiting that. It's so that we can have appropriate oversight of the SCOPs and all the other kinds of security issues that occur on our campus. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all these. Conservatives of the Peace contract is expensive. $941,000. That's a lot of money. And then, of course, we mentioned the expansion of the DD programs. The DD residential services match. You want to talk about that, Deborah?
That is because DMAS raised the rates, the Medicaid rates for residential services to ensure that there were adequate caregivers. And so we have to match that rate for our individuals who are in group homes who are locally funded.
Next slide. We've already discussed this, food security, eviction prevention. Next slide. Job Avenue. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, there we go. Job Avenue is our contracted supported employment and educational program that supports individuals who have serious mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorders. But what we've noticed is that our participation in that program has steadily declined since 2019 by about 75%. I have heard that there are alternatives, like DARS provides a strong program, and of course we have our own employment center. If this reduction is accepted, it would result in an average caseload of 21, which is well within the best practice range established by SAMHSA.
Okay, next slide. Finally, these are just, this is our food for thought. Where our budget pressures will be in the future. This is where you all will be involved in all these conversations. What will we do to respond to the substance use treatment for adolescents? What will we need to contribute to public-private partnerships or regional partnerships that address mental health? How will eviction prevention play out? Even do we need to put in more kinds of tightening of eligibility criteria. Housing grants, what will the housing grant study indicate in terms of recommendations, and what will that cost? And what I mentioned before, what will be needed in order to restructure our organization and reallocate internally, hopefully to meet the needs going forward. And that concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Freeman, Ms. Warren. I'd now like to invite Bora Johnson from the Commission on the Status of Women to join us at the front. And I see Wendy Crawford in the back from the CSB.
No, she's
nope, she's not here. She's
online.
Ah, okay.
Wendy's online.
And do we also have Linda Kelleher online?
Here's Wendy.
Great. All right, why don't we start off with you, Wendy, and Chair Crawford, and then we'll go to Linda Kelleher, and then Ms. Johnson, if you would back clean up for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Dorsey. I had prepared remarks, but Manager Swartz stole some of the thunder. I think a lot of my remarks are just expressing gratitude. So I want to thank you and the board for the budget proposal and for the time to talk about it this evening. You know, the board has a long history of supporting the work of DHS and the Community Services Board staff, and we're so grateful for that and appreciate the value that's placed on ensuring that some of our most vulnerable citizens do receive consistent quality care in our community. And we recognize that it's the leadership of this board and the decisions that you make which directly impact the overall climate and culture in our community and make it a wonderful place to live and work. And we're grateful to see that those decisions take into account those in our community who do receive services due to disability or condition. So thank you for that. I also want to take a quick second to appreciate not only Anita and Deborah for their tireless work, but all of the staff liaisons who support the Community Services Board and all of our committees. They've been very responsive to us through this community, through the budget process, responding to our questions and concerns. And of course, all the frontline staff who are working so hard. I don't need to reiterate what several people have already referenced in their presentations this evening and in comments about the mental health crisis, the substance use crisis, and the intersection of that with the shortage in available providers. So what I do want to highlight is that we see in this budget a really thoughtful approach to using resources wisely, to weaving together lots of different resources, reallocating those when it's needed, looking at creative solutions for the future in the forms of the regional programs and the public-private partnerships. All of that with a really relatively minor or modest increase in behavioral health positions to meet the needs. So the one piece that I will highlight again is the need for robust recruitment and retention bonuses. Like that is, we can't have all these wonderful programs, but if we can't staff them, that is a problem. And I want to emphasize that investment is really important because that's what's going to help us as we roll through this crisis, which is still unfolding. It's not that we see an end to it. It's not that we know whether we're at the most peak of it, the highest peak of it. But these investments are what's going to help us have the staff to run the programs that will help to mitigate the current and the future anticipated ongoing needs. So I will stop with that because I know time is really important, but thank you so much for this opportunity and thank you for this budget proposal. We fully support what the staff has presented this evening.
Thank you very much, Chair Crawford, for being concise, and certainly know that if there was more that you want to share with us, we will look forward to other opportunities throughout the budget process. So next we'll move to Ms. Kelleher.
No, that was
No.
Thank you.
Crawford.
Linda.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I'm Linda Kelleher, Chair of the Commission on Aging. I've lived in Arlington almost 50 years, and my goal here today is to talk about the focus of our older adults in Arlington, a growing population of about 38,000 people over age 60. Approaching 20% of our population here in Arlington, are almost 1 of 5 Arlington residents. Older adults are vital to our community, workforce, economy, volunteer force, including those who give their time on commissions and advisory boards, and we definitely appreciate their work. Older adults have voiced their preference to stay in their homes and community, but many are unable to do so. We really value the hard work of the very important presentation that Deborah and Anita made today, and the highlight of increasing demand on DHS services. We're seeing an impact very much among our older neighbors. More older adults need services and are at risk of eviction, homelessness, and facing food insecurity. They are also struggling with increased needs for transportation, prescription, and medical costs, as was described earlier. Arlington's Aging and Disability Division serves at the front line of supporting and advocating for the older adults in our community and persons with disabilities and their caregivers. Since the start of the epidemic that we are just coming out of, the demand for services has grown significantly and consistency. For example, the need for additional funding and resources for the community living program, a vital in-home services program for lower income individuals, has seen a 62% increase in the number of assessments completed each month. And to Adult Protective Services, their team has recorded 97 reports last month, just in February. There are more than 400 guardianship cases to which the division provides oversight in support of a management intern that we would like to see converted to a full-time position. And in the Aging and Disabilities Resource Center, we need to help with the processing of nearly 850 annual requests for both financial assistance to prevent evictions, utility cutoffs, and 115 referrals for shelter for adults who are 60 and older. On behalf of the Commission, I ask that you continue to assess the changing population and increase the resources to support older adults, especially those in need of acute services like adult protective services and senior adult mental health, as well as ongoing supports to the community living program for ongoing care that helps to reduce risks that may lead to the higher cost of institutional placement and loss of housing. Arlington continues to lead the region, the state, and the nation in our innovative approach to affordable assisted living through unique collaboration between the county and community organizations like Mary Marshall and Culpeper Garden. Thank you for increasing the funding in this budget to Culpeper Garden Assisted Living and for continuing the efforts to expand affordability in assisted living. The Commission values your commitment to ensuring that assisted living is available for all people of all income levels. But I have to ask if you can do more in assisted living, in transportation, and community living. Please do so if you can. We are the 250th age-friendly community of now 780 some in the country. And it offers a choice to persons of all ages and stages. We applaud the county's efforts to expand housing options and encourage that we continue to build affordable, accessible housing, offer safe and reliable and accessible transportation, and fund in-home services that help individuals who are age 60 and older. As I conclude my remarks, I would be remiss if I did not mention our community engagement forum coming up on Monday the 20th from 9:30 to 12:30. And we hope that other board members will join Ms. Crystal as she provides opening remarks at this premier event when we ask the older adults in our community what is most important to them. This helps us shape our strategic planning and advise the county board to take action to become inclusive for all of all ages and of all demographics. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity, and thank you for all you do for Arlington.
Thank you, Chair Kelleher. We appreciate it. Now I'll turn it over to Ms. Johnson, representing the Commission on the Status of Women. Welcome.
Thank you. Is this working? I'm Arbor Johnson, here on behalf of the Commission on the Status of Women. I will note that my 7th grader at Swanson Middle School learned about county board processes in her civics class and informed me I had 3 minutes to speak. So given that and other constraints, I will stick to it. Thank you. There are a number of things in the budget that are commendable. I'll point quickly to a few of them. Expansion of parental leave policy, increase in adoption assistance, increase in the FSA dependent care match for county employees. We applaud that. Family planning services provided already are exceptional in terms of long-acting reversible contraceptives, STI testing, and maternal health care services. We were also very pleased to see the increased family planning grant. So we would ask that you consider additional prioritization specifically for abortion services. We are in a post-Roe v. Wade country, maybe state, and it is unclear whether abortion is available in Arlington. We did a very informal toothpick poll at the Arlington County Fair, and reproductive health was the issue chosen. We had almost 1,000 responses, and reproductive health was of utmost priority to those who participated in our poll. So we would ask that you augment the county-sponsored healthcare center. We'd like to see an expansion of the budget to provide complete sexual health and reproductive care services, including doula midwife care, hormone replacement therapy, emergency contraception medication, and abortion. So really thank you for your attention to this. And then the second area I'll just point to quickly is the Commission would love to see better county data about women and gender equity available. I know it's really great that the county has prioritized making racial data available. We'd love to push on the gender front. Specifically, better public availability of data on sexual assault and violent crime, including the breadth and consistency of data, support for efficient download into widely used spreadsheet programs, and the ability to analyze data by county boundaries. Secondly, making public the percentage and numbers of female hires by the county, by and across each division and department, and number of hires by gender at each compensation level. We think this is just important for transparency. Compensation levels are important to gender equity, especially as we're hiring new people and people are turning over. And finally, public availability of performance measures indicating gender equity in the delivery and or promotion of small business support services. And then finally, I did want to point to an APS issue. I know this is not an APS budget hearing, but APS is working on providing, as per state law, it's probably unfunded, menstrual supplies in bathrooms specifically at Arlington Public School middle schools and high schools. It is not yet in place. I don't know if you've ever been to a bathroom on the 4th floor of Washington Liberty, but trying to get down to the nurse's office to get menstrual supplies is not going to happen. Kids have their own clubs to end period poverty. My son just told me about it, and I said, well, they shouldn't have to do that. We should be providing it. So I know it is in the works, but I would just urge continued attention to that. And then I would also like to especially thank Ms. Crystal for your efforts on childcare. There's more to be done, and my kids are now childcare providers instead of needing it themselves. But let's keep pushing, and I hope that others will take on the mantle as you lead the county board. So with that, thank you. And we have our Commission on the Status of Women meeting at 7 o'clock if you'd care to join on the first floor. Everyone is welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us for this, Ms. Johnson, and my apologies for putting the accent on the wrong syllable in your first name. I will not forget Arbora in the future. There we go. And so thanks to you. Thank you to Chairs Kelleher and Crawford. We do appreciate it. And we did not have Ms. Prio today, right? Okay, beautiful. Colleagues, since it would be wholly inconsistent with having covered the department that covers child and family services to keep a mom away from her preschool-aged child, So we're going to allow Ms. Crystal to go first and then continue.
I appreciate that, everybody. I'm currently missing his 4th birthday dinner at Ruthie's all day, so I'm going to ask a couple questions and then dip out. I appreciate everyone's forbearance. 2 questions actually about childcare. Before I do that, just wanted to say by way of thanks, I really appreciate the CSW's focus on abortion services, and I wanted to thank Dr. Verghese and now I know Kurt Larrick, who had been in touch with the conversation I had initiated with Planned Parenthood of Metro Washington. And it looks like their areas of greatest need are actually around the exact type of thing that our Department of Public Health and DHS does so well, which is community-based health provision and really forming those relationships with our community members, figuring out what their needs are, which is a really important part of connecting them to services. So it may not be the provision of abortion services, but I think it's really an area where I was so pleased to see the way that DHS and public health works, really syncing up with that need for the full spectrum of reproductive care. Okay, 2 quick things, or 1 quick thing and then 1 slightly longer, but I gotta say, the more I've been sitting with this point about the child care classroom observation and scoring unfunded mandate, like just the angrier it makes me. It is incredibly frustrating because we have plenty of places to put childcare resources, and this is not one. And I also know from talking to providers, this was the thing they were most worried about when childcare shifted from the Department of Human Services statewide to education, that there would just be this total loss of focus on the fact that this is an industry in crisis, struggling to hire, and instead treating them. I mean, they are academic environments, and that's important, but they are also in crisis. Long roundabout way of saying, how far down the path are they of requiring this? Is there an opportunity for us to maybe work with some others around the region and the state to just write a letter to get our General Assembly legislators involved to help them understand what a mistake this is?
It's a done deal, yeah. It's been put into regulations.
All right, and it's been done at the regulatory level, right? It's not been done. It's not a matter of state policy passed by the General Assembly.
No, I don't think so. I think it's at.
So I do think it's probably worth. I'll try to do that offline. I think maybe the point being this is a position we're going to need irrespective. But I would like to engage some of our General Assembly members and colleagues around the region because my God, what misplaced focus, right? Thank you for. Metabolizing that ask and putting it in the form of this actionable request of us. Okay, my other question was, really appreciated the comments about how we have been adding programmatic staff without adding to the backbone for, at this point, 25 years. And I know that there is some advocacy in the community about the idea of having kind of a dedicated childcare person, the way that we have a dedicated food security coordinator. I generally share our manager's antipathy, his czar-free diet, as he puts it, because I do think that can lead to kind of siloed features. And I also think it's really illustrative when you talk about that lack of capacity. In some ways, I think how Ms. Hopkins has worked has almost mattered as much as what she is working on, and the need to have people who can work cross-departmentally, interdivisionally, across sectors. I would like to pursue the idea over the coming weeks with my colleagues about adding, not to make one of your staff blush, but basically another Caitlin Hutchison who has done this type of work so amazingly well in the past, maybe to start, or definitely I'd prefer to start by focusing on the CCI, but then be available for these kind of big projects. I was interested in reactions to that thought.
Well, we've been talking about this for years already now. We had developed a very comprehensive plan. If you remember, you were the leader of those efforts that had, I think, almost 3 to 5 years of actionable items, not just the CPHD zoning parts, but working, and some of them we have implemented, like CDA training or, more trainings for providers, but we couldn't shoulder that community-wide effort. Once the pandemic started, Caitlin became, the guru of all things emergency. Marcus Alert, and she was basically, handing out PPE to all of the nonprofits. But so it wouldn't be her, but I do think it merits. I do think it's an area that is substantive in terms of the departments that it touches, and it does require some coordination and leadership be it in our department or somewhere else. I think, and similarly with the food security, that wouldn't have come together so well, I think, without having a coordinator responsible for it.
Well, I think for my thought, what I'd really love to see is a coordinator who can work across topics, right? Who can, manage, there's a huge body of work on affordable childcare, right? That is maybe 2-3 years worth of work. And then I know there will be something new, right? And so rather than have these kind of vestigial folks who are siloed into their topics, finding someone who has the capacity, as we've seen members of your team do, to be able to do that how across topics, I think could be a real asset. So I'm glad you're doing that work and hope kind of the reorg, and I hope that'll be an opportunity to do it. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I will stop monopolizing the floor, and I appreciate it.
Turn your microphone off and go to your son. All right, next, Vice Chair Garvey.
Okay, thank you.
Wish him a happy birthday from us.
Yes, blow out some candles. The conservatives are the piece. I was thinking about them in that they're very expensive, but I'm assuming having security on site would be reassuring to people who work there and actually might help attract and retain employees where we need them. Is that a correct assumption?
I think you're right. I think you have to keep in mind that one of the outcomes that we are hoping for is to reduce police overtime in terms of, basically guarding individuals, that are in custody for emergency custody orders. So, yeah.
So there's always been security there in the offices all the time, or is it you call somebody?
There is security, but it is not. Those individuals cannot receive custody from law enforcement.
Right.
It's a legal thing.
Right.
It has to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I had one other. Might as well just go just real quickly. I noted the volunteer guardians program for the under aging and disability. That fascinated me because it sounds like a really needed, particularly when you're talking about the adult protective services, and they're volunteers, and you have a good number of them. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Not too much because we're late, but that seems like a very good model.
Yeah. We have a program called Wings, and staff have kind of coordinated a number of volunteers, but there's a lot of work to be done because the volunteer guardians have to submit regular reports. I actually know this because I was a guardian myself for a loved one. So, yeah, there's a real press on the amount of time that takes. Also, people are not stepping up to volunteer to be guardians.
So we don't have that number yet.
You need to have recruitment
Okay, I hear you. All right. I thought we had all those people, and I was impressed.
No, we have a lot. Maimuna's on, she could probably give us the details, but we did have a position who was responsible for the Guardian program, and we cut that, right, several years ago. Before, there's Maimuna. And now we have a management intern who's in charge, right, Maimuna?
That's correct, Anita and Deborah. Our volunteer guardianship program consists of around 30 volunteer guardians, some of them being Arlingtonian residents, others being attorneys. And they do this, the attorneys do it, of course, pro bono. But what we saw over the last couple of years during the pandemic, as well as everyone else, is a high turnover. So now we're trying to keep pace with the demand of the need for guardians for our most vulnerable adults and matching them with a volunteer guardian. A number of our vulnerable adults are limited in resources and cannot afford to pay for an attorney or have a guardian or don't have a family member that will serve in that capacity. So it is a valuable program.
Absolutely, and not maybe covering the need as much as it might. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Karantonis, and then we'll end up with Mr. DeFerranti.
Very brief, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all that. Very insightful. I wouldn't know where to start if we had a longer conversation about one thing. Slide 9, the slide with the vacancies, is obviously, full of flags, but specifically the public assistant benefit workers. To be honest, I hear very often, at least once a week, that it has become more difficult to access services, to get assistance, etc. It begins to really cut it to the bone. It's an equity issue as well, because those who have the least ability to to access the services are now also the least served. So what is the outlook for that, and whether there are alternatives, at least to temporarily shore up the program?
Well, we've had some conversations with the deputy county manager about requesting some overstrength positions right now to at least get our caseload under control. And that could be done quickly. Of course, you know, there is a lot of competition in the region for these positions. So I think we also have our teams we have, you know, people supervising 14, 15 staff. We probably need additional supervisors because there's too many direct reports. And we just now created a senior eligibility staff position because there was no sort of pathway for mobility. Everyone has the exact same position unless you're a supervisor. And that has to be built in because otherwise there's really not incentives to stay around at the same job for the, you know. You can move around more agilely, with more agility in Prince William and some other neighboring jurisdictions. So I am going to pursue that request with the manager on the overstrengths. Mr. Manager.
You know, the conversations, I'd like to say that, you know, we need to be more creative. At the same time, I don't want you to think that just money will solve the issue. So we're taking, and this has been our #1 priority. We've been doing it over the last couple of weeks when it comes to behavioral health care workers. So we're having a series of meetings with that, and we will report back to you in a few weeks on the status.
Thank you. I know it's not easy.
Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Manager, you must have thought I hadn't read the full budget. I see in my notes that the second behavioral health docket person is in, and so I may be retracting that future hope. At least that's what my notes have.
Yeah, for the Department of Human Services, so that there's not anything there for the courts.
Got it.
Okay.
So that need is still there. That proves you're honest, because I know that adding FTEs is not your dream. But I just want the backbone and structure and the support for the senior. I had a moment of panic today that Pro-Cam Perez was not on a call that I was on, and it turns out she's on vacation, so I was more relaxed. There's a quality assurance person that I think might help her in her economic independence. But I want to align behind Ms. Crystal's thought with respect to partnerships or childcare, as well as backbone, you know, additional in case you don't do this, you're not doing this in 10 or 15 years. I feel like senior staff-wise, there's a real thing that I'm concerned about. And so those are the two thoughts, and there'll be other days to discuss. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. DeFerranti. Thank you, colleagues. Any budget questions, any things that did not get addressed through this afternoon, we can always submit in writing and, you know, make those superstars over at DHS like Brooke Hammond Perez and Caitlin Hutchinson write up the responses for it, right? There we go.
And just want to let you know, we have a lot of superstars in our department, and I'm very grateful to our staff who are still on the phone, because without them, their commitment, their dedication is just unparalleled. So.
And on that, we will end this work session. Thank you, everyone, not just two of you and all of your staffs, but the staff of CPHD, as well as all of our commissioners, for contributing to a great work session today. We'll reconvene again in this room on March 14th at 3 p.m., where we'll have the Department of Technology Services as well as Arlington Economic Development. We are now adjourned. Thank you.